Chapter 895. I see. Hitorigami lowered its head slightly, allowing its messy hair to cover its face again. It seemed to be thinking about something. Luoyu continued to flap its wings and soar high in the sky. As a magic type class that had lived for who knows how many years, it was well aware of its strengths and weaknesses. There was still water nearby. If Hitorigami made any strange moves, although it was no match for Hitorigami, it no longer needed to foolishly fight Hitorigami head-on like before. It could deal with any situation with ease. However, if it lowered its altitude, if it encountered a ruthless character like Hitorigami, who cultivated both magic and martial arts, it would not be long before Hitorigami tore it apart. Luoyu flew high in the sky for its own safety and also as a deterrent to Hitorigami. After all, as long as it was alive, Hitorigami would not be able to easily approach Lin Yuan. Once Hitorigami turned hostile again, it would be equivalent to hardening its killing intent. Although the primeval creatures who had not shown themselves were not on good terms with Lin Yuan, they would not watch Lin Yuan die without doing anything. If it missed, it would be equivalent to facing all the primeval creatures. Retreat! Lin Yuan, who was wrapped around Lei Qiuxing's shoulder, suddenly tensed up and growled in Lei Qiuxing's ear. From the moment the clouds began to disperse, he could vaguely smell danger. If Hitorigami really restrained its killing intent, this sense of danger would naturally dissipate. After all, there was no such thing as a delay. If it wanted to kill, it would kill. Once the danger was resolved, it would not warn Lin Yuan again. This also meant that Hitorigami had wanted to kill him from the beginning. At this moment, when she lowered her head and pretended to be thinking, she was definitely not weighing the pros and cons. She was deceiving Luoyu. Hitorigami and Luoyu's ears were extremely sensitive. Almost as soon as Lin Yuan finished speaking, Luoyu had already mobilized the water and swept it towards Hitorigami, who was ready to strike. Hitorigami was even faster. The blood shadow around her trembled, and her speed skyrocketed. She was even faster than when she fought Luoyu. The rolling water did not hinder Hitorigami at all. It could even be said that the water was shaken off by Hitorigami before it could even catch a whiff of its exhaust. Fortunately, Lei Qiuxing had fled with Lin Yuan all the way here. Although he was in a state of confusion, his heart was as clear as a mirror. Just like when he was in power as an emperor, every decree and imperial decree was a game with the aristocratic families, sects, and nobles. Once a peace was made, it could not be reneged. As for how many people would die and how many people would be affected, it was not important to him. After all, a high and mighty person would not care about the feelings of ants. Now, the two positions had been reversed. Hitorigami and Luoyu were important people. Lin Yuan, who knew many secrets, even though his cultivation was not high, could be counted as well. Only he and Yang Qinglin were placed in the position of ants. If anything happened to them, he and Yang Qinglin would definitely not be able to survive. Therefore, after being tied to the same rope as Lin Yuan, Lei Qiuxing chose to trust Lin Yuan unconditionally. When Lin Yuan spoke, his body reacted in the most honest way. With all his might, he retreated. Although Lei Qiuxing and Hitorigami's speed could not be compared, at this moment, this single step was the difference between the mortal world and the underworld. Because of Lei Qiuxing's subconscious retreat, he barely avoided Hitorigami's main area of attack. Like a blood pillar that reached the sky, a bloody aura rose from where Lei Qiuxing had been standing. Countless drops of blood were like sharp blades that strangled everything within the range of the blood pillar. Lei Qiuxing, who had retreated in advance, only felt a tightness in his chest. His entire body was sent flying. Moreover, at the critical moment, a layer of blood-red light screen rose. The moment Lin Yuan's incense power was exhausted, it filled the gap in the divine power barrier and barely protected this external incarnation of his. However, the blood-red light screen did not last long. The moment Lei Qiuxing was sent flying, the blood-red light screen had already shattered. If he had been a second late, Lin Yuan might have been ground into a pile of minced meat. Yang Qinglin, who had appeared 30 meters away in a flash, turned pale. he said while swaying. Black Jiao, remember this. Today, you owe this seed a life. In the future, you will have to pay me back. Lin Yuan nodded slightly, but did not say anything. Therefore, although the cultivators of that era enjoyed the most primitive rules and the densest spiritual chi of the universe, their cultivation environment was undoubtedly the worst. They had to face the experts from the primeval world, the first-generation demonic beasts who had gained wisdom after obtaining cultivation methods, and their fellow Taoists who had gone mad. Not only the cultivators, but also the entire human race at that time found it difficult to move forward and was on the verge of destruction at any time. It was just like when Goddess Nviwa created the human race, when the weak human race faced the primeval creatures who had gained wisdom from the primeval world. To be able to find a suitable path of cultivation in that era, cultivate all the way to the Kongming realm, and even foresee their impending death, make arrangements in advance to resurrect countless years later. Of course, they were not easy to deal with. Yang Qinglin saw it more clearly than Lei Qiuxing. Lei Qiuxing was just a grasshopper tied with a rope. Yang Qinglin, on the other hand, saw through the purpose of Luo Yu. Luo Yu was a top-level powerhouse who was not inferior to Hamba in other aspects, except that its magic was restrained by Hamba. The reason why it appeared here to confront Hamba was to protect Lin Yuan. If Lin Yuan died or escaped, Luo Yu would never fight Hamba to the death like an iron-headed doll. At that time, when facing Hamba, who had won, he would have no chance of survival even if he used all his trump cards. Protecting Lin Yuan was protecting himself. Lin Yuan also saw through this point, so he nodded tacitly. Even if Yang Qinglin was an ancient cultivator, he would not be able to recover his strength so quickly. Moreover, when he was at his peak, he was not a match for Hamba. Just now, he was able to withstand Hamba's attack, most likely because he had used some precious treasure. Looking at how he looked like he had suffered a backlash, it was possible that it was his natal magic weapon. This was a huge favor. According to karma, Lin Yuan should repay him with his life. Things like natal magic weapons were not things that could be casually refined like those in the novels of his previous life. In the untainted world, these things were usually associated with each other. This kind of treasure would not be easily damaged, but once it was damaged, even the lightest damage would cause one's cultivation state to drop by a level. You were lucky to be able to dodge it once. Then, what about this attack? Hamba raised his head. Even the messy hair that covered his face could not hide his faint gaze. As he raised his hands, the blood-colored pillar of heaven began to tilt towards the area where Lin Yuan was, as if the firmament was being torn apart and the Milky Way was being reversed. Chapter 896. Yang Qinglin and Lei Qiuxing's expressions changed drastically as they looked at the falling blood-colored heavenly pillar. This was because they were very clear that this level of technique had already exceeded the scope of their abilities. In other words, it had already exceeded their understanding. If no powerful figure intervened, the three of them would definitely die. Only Lin Yuan looked indifferent, as if he was not the target of Hamba. After dodging the fatal attack that Hamba had launched while pretending to be thinking, the sense of crisis in his heart rapidly decreased. Obviously, a powerful figure of the untainted land who was hiding in the dark could no longer hold back. Therefore, this seemingly powerful attack was destined to be unable to hurt him. Hamba, we gave your father some face, but you treat us like ants. That's not right, is it? In the unseen world, another voice sounded. It sounded like a sigh, but it was filled with endless killing intent and piercing coldness. The void tore open, and a red-clothed figure walked out. The pale young man had a faint smile on his face, but there was no smile in his eyes. The moment he appeared, he gently patted the fiery red gourd at his waist. The gourd instantly flew up and expanded against the wind. In the blink of an eye, it was already covering the sky and the sun. Immediately, seemingly endless red sand was spat out from the gourd, hitting the blood-red pillar like a storm. The blood-red pillar disappeared at a speed visible to the naked eye. Old man, how dare you spoil my cultivation? You deserve to die. Hamba raised her hand again, and her beautiful eyes were bloodshot. She stared coldly at Red Cloud Taoist, as if she was looking at a corpse. In a complete world, Red Cloud might not be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the six saints, but he was still an existence that was one step away from becoming a saint. In the untainted land, he would definitely be a powerful figure. Although he could not be compared to the 3,000 demon gods, he was not an ordinary person either. Hamba was indeed powerful, but in terms of age and cultivation, she was just a child in front of Red Cloud Taoist. However, it was different in the Timu world. No matter how high Red Cloud Taoist cultivation was in the past, in this world, everyone's upper limit was actually the same. What they competed with was their own means and foundation. For example, Luo Yu's power was similar to Hamba's, but its means were restrained by Hamba. It could only be a deterrent. Under such circumstances, it was not difficult to understand why Hamba dared to talk nonsense to Red Cloud Taoist. After all, if this world was complete, she would definitely not do so. Even if she did, Red Cloud Taoist would have to fight with one of the six saints first. How could he have the time to argue with her? Let's see who's the real deal over there. Let's see who will die in our battle. Taoist Red Cloud was clearly embarrassed to be reprimanded by a junior. He had been too angry recently. Previously, in the Endless Sea, he had been humiliated by Lin Yuan because of the great karma on his body. He could only leave resentfully. Now that Lin Yuan was in danger, he had rushed to the northern frontier to save Lin Yuan. Originally, he wanted to use this opportunity to ridicule Lin Yuan. However, he did not expect that after he broke Hamba's means, before he could do anything to her, Hamba would start to clamor, as if she did not put him in her eyes at all. In his rage, he could no longer maintain his image as a good guy. Naturally, Red Cloud Taoist revealed his true nature. Whether it was spiritual companion items or innate spiritual roots, they were all based on the personality of the owner. For example, the great immortal Yang Mei who had mastered the law of space was a classic example. Including Pangu who had created the world and transformed into all things, Yang Mei could easily be ranked in the top 10 of the sky demon gods. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he could even be ranked in the top 3. However, when did such a person care about other things? Just like his original body, the hollow willow. As for Red Cloud Taoist's spiritual companion treasure, the 99 soul-scattering gourd, he hung on his waist. Even in the unscrupulous primitive world, there were not many existences who would casually ask for the souls of scattered people. Demon Master Kuan Peng was tricked by Western Sage Urshi, but only destroyed Red Cloud Taoist's physical body, not his primordial spirit. Even with the protection of the innate spiritual treasure, if someone like Demon Master Kuan Peng really wanted to chase after him, how could Red Cloud Taoist escape? Speaking of which, the 99 soul-scattering gourd could be said to be a natural enemy for Hamba. As the ancestor of zombies, absorbing the essence of the sun and the moon was only the most basic cultivation for Hamba. Just like other cultivators, apart from meditating, Hamba also needed to consume spiritual treasures and elixirs. Hamba also knew how to kill and steal souls. Not only could he absorb blood to increase his cultivation, he also needed to refine the souls that were full of hostility and resentment into his own blood, turning them into an extremely vicious attack. Therefore, it was true that Red Cloud Taoist had dispelled the blood-colored pillar and disrupted Hamba's cultivation. Even if your father were here, he wouldn't dare to. Red Cloud Taoist cast the 99 soul-scattering gourd over his head and stared at Hamba with a cold look. However, before Red Cloud Taoist could finish, Hamba roared hoarsely, "You can't stop talking about that old bastard. Can you? Even if I don't have this father and don't want the position of Heavenly Lady, I'm still the god of drought, a great devil. I've come this far on my own. Since when did we become like those rotten Taoists who had to suppress others with their roots?" Lin Yuan twitched his mouth. With Red Cloud's mouth, it was not surprising that he would be beaten to death. However, the problem was that this guy had a wide circle of friends. In the primitive world, everyone thought he was a nice guy, which surprised Lin Yuan. Hamba's father was indeed ferocious. In the later period of the Yin Emperor's era, he took advantage of the situation and fought with various tribes. He was invincible all the way and eventually created the situation of the Yin Emperor, the Yellow Emperor in Chiyu. After the Yin Emperor was defeated by Qiyu, he fought with Qiyu many times and unified the world. During his reign, there was no need to talk about his achievements. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors were not just empty titles. They were not real. Looking at the Yellow Emperor's life, there were many unethical things he did. Hamba was definitely one of them. After all, without this daughter, Chiyu's formation of bitter wind and bitter rain was enough to make the Yellow Emperor suffer. However, after the war, Hamba quickly became a demon and was hated by everyone. Humans can't, at least they shouldn't. Therefore, it was only natural for Hamba to hate the Yellow Emperor. After all, the Yellow Emperor could be said to have taken great credit for her downfall. Moreover, he had thrown everything to his daughter, who had turned into a demon, to bear the burden while he happily took over the Yin Emperor and began the reign of the Yellow Emperor. Red Cloud Taoist, on the other hand, not only did he destroy Hamba's cultivation, he said a total of 3 sentences. One sentence was ruthless, and the other 2 sentences were about the Yellow Emperor. It was as if they did not touch Hamba because of the Yellow Emperor's face. Otherwise, Hamba would be a piece of trash that could be casually crushed to death. With this style of speech, how could he have a wide circle of friends? If this was not strange, then what was? Chapter 897. Let's go. Lin Yuan took a deep breath and directly told Lei Qiusheng without lowering his voice. Putting himself in Hitorigami's shoes. If he were in Hitorigami's shoes, he would probably be fuming with rage at this moment. There was even a possibility that he would be killed on the spot. Even if the space collapsed and they perished together, it would not be a loss. No matter what, Red Cloud Taoist was a mighty figure who almost became a sage. He was also an innate creature in the untainted land. It was a great deal to trade one for one. After all, once the world was repaired, the strength of the 2 sides would be pulled apart quickly. It would be difficult to kill him if he tried to talk his way out. But even if Hamba did not have the thought of exchanging one for one, since he had already said so, it was impossible for them not to fight. If such experts were to fight, if not for the fact that Luo Yu had stopped them from fighting, the shockwaves from the battle would be enough to kill them 800 times over. If they did not run now, they would not be able to do so later. You can't escape. The killing intent in Hamba's eyes disappeared. She broke away from Red Cloud Taoist's mocking state and stared at Lin Yuan fiercely again. Lin Yuan tilted his head and said in a low voice, "Come on, I know what you're thinking. You know very well that once the 3 realms are repaired and the sages arrive in this world, you won't be able to defeat them even if you join forces. But this doesn't stop you from wanting to be the Yama King. After all, the sages will arrive after the world is repaired. If you kill me, not only will you be able to secure your position as the Yama King, these untainted creatures will also help you hunt down the candidates for the Celestial Emperor to prevent the 3 realms from being repaired. At that time, you'll have enough time to accumulate your foundation and ensure that you'll be safe when the sages arrive, right? Just like how Hamba could break Luo Yu's means in the same realm, Red Cloud Taoist could also break Hamba's cultivation. The realm after real God depended on one's foundation and accumulation. Even if Hamba's basic attributes were 100 times higher than Red Cloud Taoist's, it would not be as good as Red Cloud Taoist's. If Hitorigami were to become the king of hell, she would definitely stir up a storm of blood. Once she had accumulated enough vengeful souls and chi of blood, it would not be so easy for Red Cloud Taoist to break her technique. Once she had accumulated to a certain extent, it would not be impossible for her to fight against a saint. After all, sages were not that strong, especially the sages after Hongjun. They were fake sages to begin with. Whether it was the so-called primordial violet chi or the severing of 3 corpses, they were all evil paths. Before Hongjun took control of the heavenly Tao, those old men were all masters who had directly attained primordial chaos. Each one of them was stronger than the last. There were even existences like Yang Mei and Shurchun who had grasped the great Tao of space and time. Not to mention bullying juniors, they could directly crush those of the same level. Being a saint and having the strength of a saint were 2 different things. What was primordial chaos? Comprehending and grasping a great Tao meant directly attaining primordial chaos. To put it in a more profound way, It meant fusing oneself with the Tao. Reaching the Saint Realm without attaining primordial chaos was just fooling fools. It was like a demonic beast without innate magic skills. No matter how strong its attribute was, it would only be played to death by a cunning predator. Only those ignorant creatures of the untainted land at that time knew how powerful the six sages were. They did not even dare to resist and directly escaped from the untainted land. However, for Lin Yuan, who was in existence after the ancient times, it was another matter. Hong Jun said that there were only a limited number of sages and that the six sages were conferred. In fact, it was just a group leader setting up six administrators. However, in fact, there was no limit to the number of sages. Fusing oneself with the Tao meant attaining primordial chaos. If one could do this, he would be in the Saint Realm. In other words, in the original untainted land, everyone could be a group leader. However, Hong Jun, the group leader, turned it into a situation where all living beings desperately fought for the administrator position. After being pointed out by Lin Yuan, Hamba was not anxious or angry. She just nodded and said coldly, "Yes, but even if you see through it, what can you do? When I kill you, I will be the king of hell of this world. This old man will have to hold it in even if he is dissatisfied." When she finished speaking, she curled her lips in disdain. Obviously, she was still dissatisfied with Red Cloud's previous words. Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes and said doubtfully, "Have you never thought about why you would have such an idea? Why did you choose to invade the northern frontier at this time and try to transform it into the underworld? In the end, it thinks that I am too slow and wants to use this method to elect a king of hell as soon as possible. So, have you never thought that the Celestial Emperor actually existed long ago? How is this possible?" Hamba and Red Cloud roared almost at the same time. Although the Jade Emperor in Zhang Byron's previous life was never liked, the Celestial Emperor was indeed supreme. Even if Zhang Byron was not in the top ranks, he was more than qualified to fight for the title of the number one person below the sage. After all, he did not go through the 132 billion tribulations for nothing. Zhang Byron could become a Buddha after going through 81 tribulations. His strength was imaginable. After all, he represented the heavens and was the supreme ruler of the gods. Although the Celestial Emperor was only the executor of the rules, the position of executor was not so easy. The 3 realms, the 4 lives, the 10 directions, and the 6 paths were all under the control of the rules. Although they each had their own master, in the end, they were still under the control of the Celestial Emperor. If an existence like the Celestial Emperor really appeared in this world, it was impossible for them not to know, unless Taoist Red Cloud suddenly raised his head and stared at the cloudless sky. He clenched his teeth, his right hand still forming a seal. After a while, his face suddenly turned as pale as a sheet of paper. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood, as if someone had struck his chest with a heavy hammer. Is there really a Celestial Emperor? When Hamba saw Taoist Red Cloud's aura suddenly become chaotic, he immediately asked in surprise. Red Cloud wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and nodded solemnly. He said in a dull voice, "It does exist. Just now, when I was calculating the heavenly mystery, it was just a glimpse. Before I could see the origin of the Celestial Emperor, I was directly beaten back." As his voice fell, he no longer paid attention to Hamba. Instead, he turned his head and looked at Lin Yuan. He said in a deep voice, "He hid it so well that even we did not find any clues." "How did you know?" It was impossible for them not to notice the birth of the Celestial Emperor. Even a heaven's chosen one like Lin Yuan could not escape. He was also targeted by Hamba for the position of the King of Hell. Of course, this was also because the will of the world deliberately leaked information about Lin Yuan. However, the existence of the Celestial Emperor was not leaked at all. If Red Cloud had not suddenly calculated the heavenly mystery to investigate the Celestial Emperor, he would have been caught off guard. In order to prevent more secrets from being leaked, he exposed the existence of the Celestial Emperor and beat Red Cloud out. This was also the work of the will of the world. Chapter 898. Although the will of the world was not very intelligent, it was not stupid. It knew that these primitive creatures were not willing to let this world be completed. So it concealed the chi of the celestial ruler and planned to force Lin Yuan to become the king of hell, to complete the three realms and promote the evolution of the whole world. However, it did not expect that such a secretive thing would be exposed by Lin Yuan. Hearing this, Lin Yuan was also embarrassed for a moment. After all, the eyes of the three big bosses fell on him. At this time, he certainly couldn't fool them by making up nonsense. The system certainly didn't want to take the blame for this. He couldn't tell the truth and tell them that he just said it casually to distract Hamba's attention so that it would be convenient to escape. He was willing to say it, but they had to be willing to believe him. Silence. A deathly silence. All eyes were focused on Lin Yuan, waiting for him to confess everything. Lin Yuan thought for a moment, then said faintly, "You need to deduce the mysteries of heaven for such a small thing. Do you have so much mana that you can't use it all? The existence of the celestial ruler is not a secret. Although the Shinwu dynasty was not established for long, it usurped the throne and fought with the surrounding forces every year. Hengduan Mountains, the Qinjiang dynasty, the Xuanjin dynasty, and even the monsters in the Endless Sea. How many creatures died in it? Even if the Shinwu dynasty was not established for long, it should learn from the other big brothers and use the power of the country to cultivate a few Yin gods to monitor the territory and command the monsters and enemies who surrendered, right?" Speaking of this, Lin Yuan turned his head and glanced at Lei Qiuxing beside him. He continued, "But the Shinwu dynasty is in a precarious situation. Obviously, it is on the verge of destruction. Various rebel armies have appeared out of nowhere. Even the Shinlin army, known as the Shinwu Shield, has been mobilized. Have you seen a Yin master active on the battlefield?" This, Red Cloud Taoist and Hitorigami looked at each other. At their level of cultivation, they could change several dynasties just by sleeping casually. Who would have the time to care about those mortals who were as weak as ants? However, what Lin Yuan said was reasonable. After all, the Shinwu dynasty was in such a mess, but they had never seen any Yin deities belonging to the Shinwu dynasty. This situation usually meant that there were two possibilities. Either the Yin deities of the Shinwu dynasty had been wiped out by the Sky Demon before things got out of hand, or they had collectively rebelled. The former was possible, but it was impossible for such a big matter to remain silent. Lei Qiuxing also couldn't just watch as his Yin gods were wiped out and foolishly cooperate with Sky Demon. After all, Sky Demon's ambition was written all over his face. If it was the latter, it wasn't impossible, but it couldn't be so coincidental, right? Did they all just happen to turn traitor at this time? Was there something wrong with their heads? There were Yin deities in every dynasty, but Yin deities were different from true gods in the cultivation world. They couldn't consume ordinary incense and could only rely on the fate of the country. The stronger the fate of the country, the stronger the Yin deities. They might even have a chance to condense a physical body and be reborn. On the other hand, without the nourishment of the fate of the country, the Yin deities would become weaker and weaker until they completely disappeared. Therefore, even if they wanted to rebel, it was impossible for all of them to die together with the Shinwu dynasty. Seeing that he was involved in this matter, Lei Qiuxing's face turned red. He stammered, This matter actually I'm not too sure. It's just that the Shrine of Gods suddenly reported that they had lost contact with all the Yin deities. Even those who stayed in the Shrine of Gods all year round had disappeared without a trace. They couldn't be found in the Shinwu dynasty. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. The disappearance of the Yin deities actually made you think of the existence of the Heaven Sovereign. This is really incredible. Taoist Red Cloud sighed with emotion. Then his expression changed slightly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Taking away the Yin deities out of thin air? Aren't they afraid of losing the nourishment of the country's fate? Could it be that thing?" At this moment, Luo Yu, whose presence was extremely weak, finally interrupted. He said in a muffled voice, "It's definitely not that thing. After all, that thing is still in the Heaven Court. If you want to take it away, you have to ask the gods of the Heaven Court first. In this world, there's no such ruthless existence. But even if it's not, it's probably something similar. The conversation between Luo Yu and Taoist Red Cloud was no doubt an old riddle man to Lei Qiuxing and Yang Qinglin. However, to existences like Lin Yuan who came from the ancient times, these words were very straightforward. However, these two clearly had some scruples and didn't dare to directly say the three words, investiture of the gods. Take a bit of the true spirit and integrate it into the investiture of the gods. From then on, they would be the lackeys of the heaven court. As long as the investiture of the gods was not destroyed, they would not be free. They could only be ordered around by the person who controlled the investiture of the gods. Taoist Red Cloud and Hamba exchanged a look. They both took a few steps back. Although they were still on guard against each other, the hostile atmosphere had obviously weakened. No matter how tense these escaped prehistoric creatures were, the existence of the prehistoric world was still their common enemy. Moreover, it was undoubtedly the enemy with the highest priority. The will of the world could create a heaven sovereign without them knowing. It could also create a hell king without them knowing. In other words, this world could be repaired at any time. Powerful enemies from the prehistoric world could also come at any time. Lin Yuan now had the upper hand. As long as he didn't die, no one could surpass him to become the Hell King. However, if Hamba succeeded today, it was hard to say whether she would be the next Hell King. What was certain was that this world had most likely begun to evolve. We have to find that heaven sovereign and kill him. A cold light flashed in Taoist Red Cloud's eyes. He reached out his right hand again, trying to calculate, as if he had to find the whereabouts of that heaven sovereign. However, Luo Yu gently shook his head and sighed. It's useless. Since the heaven sovereign has already been born, it's too late to say anything. Moreover, it has already created that thing. Even if you kill the heaven sovereign, so what? The existence that is ranked above that thing will descend to this world and choose a suitable heaven sovereign to bring back. At this point, he looked at Lin Yuan and continued, the most important thing now is to not let the Hell King appear. I suggest that we arrange for some experts to be responsible for protecting this kid. If he dies, we'll all be in trouble. Crisis averted? Fortune and misfortune? Lei Qiuxing's intense alarm bells suddenly stopped ringing. He looked at Lin Yuan somewhat enviously. Although the words of these big shots were confusing him, he could still understand some of the words that were not taboo or secret. It seemed that not only would Lin Yuan not die here today, he might even gain a super powerful bodyguard. Taoist Red Cloud did not seem to hear these words. He continued to calculate while vomiting blood. Hamba also turned her head, as if she was not willing to communicate with Luo Yu at all. Chapter 899. The scene once again fell into dead silence. The big shots present were all old foxes among old foxes. The so-called friendship and camp were all empty. Only benefits were real. These prehistoric creatures had no choice but to protect Lin Yuan. As long as Hongjun gave them a smile, they might help Hitorigami kill Lin Yuan. If they counted on such an existence to protect them, they might as well count on their enemies to be merciful. Lin Yuan pursed his lips. His gaze shifted slightly, and he said in a deep voice, "No, I think the most important thing now is..." At this point, Lin Yuan adjusted his body, pointed at Hitorigami with the tip of his tail, and continued, "You have to withdraw from the northern frontier. The transformation of the underworld is irreversible, but without the intervention of the caster, I'm still confident that I can draw in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cleanse the northern frontier. Otherwise, when this place really turns into the underworld, who knows what level of undying will be brewed." Although the mission given by the system was to kill the outer god, the current Lin Yuan was no match for Hitorigami. Moreover, the system did not give a deadline for completing the mission. Since there was a possibility of peace talks now, it was better to plan for the long term. There was no need to fight for a moment of anger. Me? Hitorigami was slightly startled. Immediately, his cold gaze swept past Lin Yuan. He said coldly, "Weren't you the one who planned the northern frontier to end up in this state for the sake of the position of the underworld king? Even if I wanted to do such a thing, the northern frontier should be crimson red at this moment." Lin Yuan. When Hitarigame's voice fell, he was dumbfounded. The transformation of the northern frontier into the underworld was very fast. The places without the protection of the Black Water Dragon King Temple and the Beast Lord Kirin had almost turned into the Nine Nether Desolation. If the Yin energy, resentment energy, and death energy accumulated over time, no one knew what kind of terrifying netherworld creatures would be born. Even with the help of this world's will, it would not be easy to transform the northern frontier in such a short time. Therefore, the outer god's strength was definitely not weak. Hitarigame was undoubtedly one of the candidates who met the requirements. But in this situation, Hitarigame would not joke around with his life, and the prehistoric creatures would not watch this world be repaired. In the future, not to mention killing Lin Yuan, even getting close to Lin Yuan would be an extremely difficult task. Therefore, there was no need for her to be petty at this time. Not only would it be meaningless, but it would also make Lin Yuan more vigilant against her. In other words, the outer deity in the system's mission was not Hitarigame. She was just a smokescreen. Such a scheme, if it were not for the intervention of the untainted land creatures, which led to the current situation, Lin Yuan would not be a match for Hamba. He would either be captured and his soul would be refined, or he would have to give up all his outer body incarnations and the northern frontier and hide in the endless sea to cultivate. However, in that case, it would be equivalent to giving up the path of a true god, and he would only be a fake god for the rest of his life. The system did not give him a time limit to complete the mission, but it gave him the conditions for failure. If the northern frontier fell and all the temples were destroyed, the system would not give him the chance to start over again. When Lin Yuan died at the hands of Hitarigame, or when the system deprived him of the opportunity to become a god, then the position of God of Hell would fall into the hands of the outer deity. Coupled with the cooperation of the Celestial Emperor, who had been keeping a lid on the situation since his birth, it would only be a matter of time before the three realms were restored. You are heartless, and I am unrighteous. Do you really think that I can't find the outer deity? The corners of Lin Yuan's mouth curled up slightly. His heterochromatic eyes were piercingly cold, and he did not restrain his hostility at all. On the other side, Lei Fan, who had been exposed by Lin Yuan, fled frantically. Even though he had become an immortal, the fear of being dominated by Lin Yuan had not diminished in the slightest. Moreover, he had died once, so he was more sensitive to the aura of death. Even though Lin Yuan had only used an outer body incarnation without cultivation, Lei Fan still believed that as long as Lin Yuan was willing, killing him would be as easy as flipping his hand. After all, the Black Jiao had too many secrets. Just the fact that he had transformed from a snake into a dragon was something that even the dragon clan of the Four Seas, who had dominated the endless sea for countless years, coveted. Furthermore, in the current chaotic world, there were many terrifying existences that were so strong that it made one's hair stand on end. Such an expert would definitely not appear out of thin air. However, Lei Fan had read a lot of books since he was young, but he had never seen any information related to those experts. He had not even seen their figures in the unofficial history books. However, Lin Yuan seemed to have an exceptional understanding of them. Even that mysterious expert who could bestow immortality to living beings and pull the dead back from their hazy wandering, who called himself the Death God, had once said that Lin Yuan was an existence of the same level as him. If such an expert was afraid of Lin Yuan, what reason did he have to look down on Lin Yuan? Blind arrogance would only bring destruction upon oneself. But why do I feel so uneasy? Lei Fan stretched out his hand and clutched his chest. Even if he was an immortal, he could still feel his own heartbeat. At that moment, he could even feel that his heartbeat was increasing rapidly, as if it would break free from its restraints and squeeze out from his throat in the next second. Such a feeling was not unfamiliar to him. Previously, before he had such an opportunity, he had met that fox girl Kagura once. Even though she had already restrained herself and obediently stayed in the Demon Emperor's Association as a senior deacon, her authority was only below that of the vice president, but her reputation was not prominent. However, Lei Fan would never forget the first time he met Kagura, the feeling of being targeted by a top predator. The feeling of death always surrounding one's body was something that no one could endure except for those who sought death wholeheartedly. With his current level of cultivation, even if he were to face a murderous Kagura alone, he would not be afraid. But the feeling of being targeted by a top predator still made his heart palpitate. Moreover, he was very clear that this murderous intent came from the true ruler of the northern frontier. That's right. This time, not only did I set it up, I even impersonated Li Zhong and obtained a precious cultivation technique from it. This is a heavenly opportunity. If it did not target me, it would be strange indeed. Thinking of that, the corners of Lei Fan's mouth curled up slightly, as if he was rather satisfied with his gains. But when he went to investigate the information flow in his mind, the smile on his face suddenly froze, and he asked in surprise, "Why did it change?" He could not recall the contents of the cultivation technique that the Black Jiao had just passed down to him. But he was certain that what he saw at that time and what he was seeing now were two completely different things. His own sea of consciousness had been unknowingly tampered with by the Black Jiao. Lei Fan's soul almost left his body as he hugged his head with both hands, sweat dripping down from his forehead. Chapter 900. Having one sea of consciousness tampered with was not a small matter to anyone, because the sea of consciousness was related to the integrity of a person. If one sea of consciousness was damaged, the lightest consequence would be losing one's soul. Losing one's soul meant losing all of one's memories and common sense. It was like a piece of white paper that had been stained with ink that had been washed clean. Not a single trace of ink could be seen. Even if one still looked the same as before, no one dared to say that they were still themselves after losing their soul. What was left behind by the previous owner were at most some small habits of the body. Of course, losing one's soul was different from losing one's memories. Losing one's memories was only being stimulated, and one could still regain one's original memories. But once one lost one's soul, it was equivalent to having a different person living in the same body. As for faking one's death, although it was worse than losing one's soul, it was still acceptable, because a cultivator who had fallen to this stage was equivalent to having his body paralyzed. He would not be able to control the movements of his body, and could only lie there like a corpse. His five senses would also gradually disappear. But at least he was still himself. After death, he could still enter the cycle of reincarnation as a soul. But to an undying person like him, no matter if it was losing one's soul or faking one's death, it was an unbearable evil consequence. Disregarding the former, if it was the latter, would he have to lie there until the world was destroyed before he could be free? After trembling for a while, and seeing that the Black Jiao did not take any further action, Lei Fan regained some of his calmness. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, he once again began to sense the cultivation technique that Lin Yuan had left behind. After roughly reading through it, Lei Fan's breathing became heavy again. He muttered, "It's like this. It's actually like this. It's really incomparably profound. I wonder where that Black Jiao had found such a miraculous cultivation technique. And he was so generous, passing it down so casually." As his voice fell, the air was filled with the smell of lemons. When he first looked at this cultivation technique, it was actually just ordinary. But the more he read, the more interesting it became. From the entry level to the great attainment level, it directly merged with his own knowledge and thoughts. Compared to the cultivation technique that Lin Yuan had given to Li Zhong, it was definitely the one that was most suitable for him. If he started to cultivate according to this cultivation technique, then he would truly be able to achieve the great Tao. The threshold of the void realm would not even exist. So the transformation of this cultivation technique was actually not because the Black Jiao had done something to his sea of consciousness. It was because this cultivation technique was originally an incomparably unique existence. Previously, what he had seen was actually a cultivation technique that was suitable for Li Zhong. But when this mass of information took root in his sea of consciousness, it gradually merged with his own thoughts, and naturally evolved into this cultivation technique that was tailor-made for him. Back when he was the king of the northern frontier under the Black Jiao's command, he had not been treated so well. Not to mention that he had been taken advantage of by Lin Yuan for free. He had been restricted in whatever he wanted to do. Not to mention bestowing cultivation techniques, he had been treated like a tool, the kind that would take advantage of him and not own up to it. Why was it that when it came to Li Zhong, such a cultivation technique could be bestowed so casually? Was the difference in treatment between people really that great? He, Lei Fan, was from the prestigious Lei family, a side branch of the imperial family. No matter whether it was his knowledge or his methods. Although he did not dare to call himself a dragon or phoenix among men, but he was at least above average. He did not dare to call himself a Kingswa, but he was definitely qualified to be a governor of the border. How much stronger could that humble disciple called Li Zhong be compared to him? The jealousy in his eyes quickly faded away as Lei Fan slowly got up and muttered to himself, "Oh well, no matter what, this cultivation technique has already fallen into my hands. I'd better go and meet up with that fellow first. I just don't know if that Black Jiao's current methods and the forest of hungry ghosts that I had painstakingly set up would be able to keep him here." With a single thought, Lei Fan involuntarily began to imitate the movement techniques recorded in the cultivation technique, as well as some of the tricks of exerting force. His speed was now 3 times faster than when he had been fleeing right under the nose of Lin Yuan. As his proficiency level continued to increase, Lei Fan's speed continued to increase. It was just that he himself was not aware of this point, because at this moment, he had completely entered into a state of enlightenment. Even the feeling of being watched by someone was subconsciously thrown to the back of Lei Fan's mind. In actual fact, that was not an illusion, nor was it a psychological effect. As the one who imparted the scripture of living beings, Lin Yuan and Lei Fan had already established a kind of mysterious connection. It was also because of this connection that the deeper Lei Fan's cultivation of the tailor-made cultivation technique, the more powers of living beings he would be able to feed back to Lin Yuan. With this powers of living beings, Lin Yuan could easily take on the appearance of all the living beings under his command and use all their powers. Even the appearance he imitated would not be seen through by the powerful beings. After all, after establishing this connection, as long as he accumulated enough powers of living beings, he would be able to create a replica of Lei Fan and put it on himself. At that time, he would be the real Lei Fan, just like the 6-eared macaque and Sun Wukong. Even if they stood side by side, no one would be able to tell who was the real one and who was the fake one. This level of cultivation technique could already be considered as a divine ability, and it was not something that could be seen through just by seeing through illusions. This was a power that was above the natural order. In the journey to the west, Sun Wukong's 72 transformations to avoid the 3 calamities had a similar effect. The 72 transformations were endless, and no matter what he turned into, it would have the corresponding abilities and characteristics. It could even counter the 3 calamities that were feared by the heavens. Although it was an extraordinary item, it was still just a divine ability and was far from being as all-encompassing as the scripture of living beings. It was just that the 72 transformations did not incur the jealousy of the heavens and did not have the harsh cultivation conditions of the scripture of living beings. Of course, that was just the basic usage of the scripture of living beings. As one of the basics, once a connection was established, Lin Yuan could use this connection to check the state of the cultivator of the scripture of living beings in real time. As long as the two of them were not separated by an entire world, what Lei Fan saw and heard would be what Lin Yuan saw and heard. Even what Lei Fan was thinking, as long as Lin Yuan was willing, he could check it at any time. He could even simulate Lei Fan's thoughts to carry out his thinking, so as to avoid revealing any characteristics that were completely different from the original body when he transformed into a living being. When Lei Fan had transformed into Li Zhong's appearance and appeared before Lin Yuan at an extremely fast speed, Lin Yuan had already become suspicious of him. The reason why he had passed down the scripture of living beings was firstly to lock on a Lei Fan and strike at the so-called Northern Restoration Society. Secondly, it was a form of revenge against the will of the world for setting him up. However, he did not expect to hit the mark by a stroke of luck. The existence that was transforming the northern frontier into the underworld was not the most suspicious Hitterigami, but the Langya board that had been lurking somewhere in the northern frontier all this while. Now that Lei Fan had tricked him into entering the forest of hungry ghosts, he would definitely return and report it. By then, he would be able to ferret out the outer deity. Chapter 901. Other than this lucky hit, Lin Yuan was still prepared to spread the universal scripture. After all, the system was helping him to conceal the heavenly secrets to take revenge on this insatiable world will. Before this matter was exposed, it would be a waste not to use it. Who would not desire a power that was above the rules, or even the power to set and modify the rules? After all, he had been hunted down by Lin Yuan, who was supported by the world will. As he was worried that the battle between the child of the dimension and the transmigrator might lead to his death, Lin Yuan had no choice but to rely on the system's power to hide. Although the relationship between the two was ambiguous, as long as Lin Yuan was not the Netherworld King, the world would not have the intention to destroy him and replace him with a new Netherworld King. If it weren't for the existence of the system and the prehistoric creatures, Lin Yuan could only choose a place with good feng shui for himself and order a coffin for himself in addition to taking over the position of the King of Hell if he didn't have the system and the prehistoric creatures. After all, the greatest obsession of this world was never to make the world have good feng shui, but to mend the world so that it could advance to the level of the heavenly axiom. In order to achieve this goal, it would definitely do anything. Lei Fan, your shallow knowledge has always been your weakness. Even after dying once, you are still so careless. Looks like your death was not in vain. Sensing that Lei Fan was already engrossed in the universal scripture, Lin Yuan could not help but laugh. He shook his head and threw away all the distracting thoughts in his mind as he continued to observe Lei Fan. The system's mission was to kill an outer god. Even if the other party was not as strong as Hitterigami, he was still a god. His bottom line was much higher than Lin Yuan's. As for the prehistoric creatures, they could not be counted on. It was not surprising that they could stop Hitterigami, but this did not mean that they would fight the outer god for Lin Yuan. If he wanted to fight, it was obviously unrealistic to rely on his avatar. Not to mention that he did not have so much incense power to waste. Even if he did, why would he do something like taking off his pants to fart? They could accumulate incense power, and as long as the time was right, they could be used directly. Moreover, their cultivation was not any weaker than the main body. If they hid in the dark, it was equivalent to giving himself an extra life. In this situation, even if he forcefully used incense power to increase the cultivation of his avatars, it would not be beneficial to the overall situation. After all, in the eyes of Hitterigami and Taoist Red Cloud's eyes, one level 8 desolate demon was no different from two. They were all ants that could be easily crushed. There was nothing wrong with his brain. Why did he have to waste the power of incense? He did not deny that he was afraid of death. Back then, he had arranged so many avatars to leave himself a way out. However, ever since he had obtained the scripture of all living beings, his horizons and plans had skyrocketed. He had a better plan for the use of these avatars. However, before leaving the northern frontier, he needed to confirm how bad the situation at the northern frontier had deteriorated and how much time he had left to set up his plans in the Endless Sea. Or, if the northern frontier needed him to return immediately to oversee it, or if he could complete the system's mandatory mission in the Endless Sea, allowing his strength to undergo a qualitative leap. At the same time, he could borrow Lei Fan's eyes to see what cultivation level this outer god that the will of the world had taken a fancy to was. Boring, I'm leaving. Hitterigami's eyes, which were hidden under his messy hair, flashed a bloody light. He shook his green sleeves and turned into a bloody shadow to escape. After Hitterigami had completely left, Red Cloud Taoist let out a faint sigh and said in a deep voice, I don't know how many years it will take for her to understand her father's painstaking efforts. She will always have the temperament of a child. Luo Yu looked in the direction where Hitterigami had left and let out a faint sigh as well. He agreed and said, she will not understand. Her father has always protected her very well. The so-called 5 emperors are just a chess piece in that person's hand. In that chaotic situation back then, there were only a few who managed to escape unscathed. Yinglong is one of the dragon ancestors. Her strength and background are both above average. It is all thanks to her father that which was able to avoid that calamity. Ever since Hongjun had become the ruler of the world, the entire chaotic world had been filled with mutual deception. The only difference was that one's table manners were elegant or ugly. The 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors sounded like a great title, but they were just a few chess pieces in that person's hand. Lin Yuan, who had heard everything, thought for a while and soon realized that this was Red Cloud Taoist's way of reminding him and showing his goodwill. After all, although this kind of thing was known by many people, it was definitely a secret. In the history books, it was mostly the same as the secrets that those powerful big shots could not mention. The secrets of those big shots were not so bad. After all, they were all mortals. Hundreds of years later, they would be easily manipulated by others. However, most of the secrets that the primitive creatures knew came from the extremely powerful primitive creatures. Basically, they were existences that could survive the destruction of the world. After all, it involved the 5 emperors and was called a calamity. It was not hard to imagine how powerful the chess player was. Even Taoist Red Cloud, who was so tyrannical, had to be afraid of such an existence. This kind of seemingly casual conversation was impossible to be unintentional. They were deliberately leaking some ancient secrets to Lin Yuan. Following the conversation between Red Cloud Taoist and Luo Yu, Lin Yuan's eyes slowly widened. He tried his best, but could not suppress the shock in his heart. At this moment, he even felt that his worldview had been shattered. The chaotic world was not a world. The so-called Great Thousand World, Middle Thousand World, and Small Thousand World were not naturally formed. They were all created by the powerful beings in the chaotic world, just like how Pan Gu created the world. The chaotic world created by Pan Gu was more like a universe that included these worlds of different sizes. Hongjun, who had mastered the way of heaven, was as terrifying as the ultimate of this universe. This was the first time that Lin Yuan knew that the chaotic universe could be explained in this way. However, it was not groundless to say that the powerful beings in the chaotic world were all gods of creation. For example, there was the heaven-opening scripture of the Grand Supreme Elder in the Taoist canon. In the Journey to the West, there was also a record of the Grand Supreme Elder holding the talisman and opening the sky. The so-called Journey to the West was actually a private server opened by the Grand Supreme himself. In this private server, the Grand Supreme even created numerous avatars and played the roles of Pan Gu, Goddess Nuwa, and other powerful beings in the chaotic world. However, what was intriguing was that there seemed to be no Hongjun in this world. Perhaps, as recorded in the Journey to the West, the square inch was the heart, the beer was the heart, the moon and the stars were also the heart. The so-called Journey to the West was just a dream in the Grand Supreme's heart. Chapter 902. However, just like the investiture of the gods, the Journey to the West was also a calamity. It happened before. In that cultivation tribulation, there was actually a deeply hidden game that had yet to be uncovered. Very few people even paid attention to it, but it made countless cultivators and demons who were active at that time tremble in fear. Only Hamba was one of the few who did not know the truth. Since ancient times, there had been sacrifices. There were only 2 major events in a country. One was sacrifice, and the other was war. They were sacrifice and war. It was just that the initial object of worship evolved from the original heaven to the existence of the emperor. Especially after the fall of the Shang dynasty and the establishment of the Zhou dynasty, this emperor also had a taboo name, which was the so-called god of Haoyin. In the myths, he was the symbol of heaven, the lord of gods. However, in the game between Haoyin and Taishang, Haoyin was defeated by Taishang and died. The successor was Zhang Yuyu, the Jade Emperor, who was known as Zhang Bairen because he was obviously very strong but always liked to be patient. A human from the mortal world was chosen by Taishang to be the Lord of Gods and completely replaced God of Haoyin. As for the game that defeated the Lord of Gods, it was probably during the Warring States period. The school of Yin Yang believed that every dynasty and state had virtues, which were the 5 virtues of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Although the school of Yin Yang did not develop it, this theory had been passed down. At the same time, the school of Yin Yang also believed that a country's characteristics should be in line with its virtues. The colors of its flag and armor should also be in line with its virtues. At the same time, the five elements promoted and restrained each other. When a dynasty was abdicated and inherited, it promoted each other. When a new dynasty replaced the old one through war, it was a restraint. For example, Emperor Yin belonged to the fire element. The yellow emperor replaced it with earth, which meant that earth replaced fire. Yao gave the throne to Shun, which meant that water replaced metal. Later on, Shun gave the throne to Yu, which meant that would replace water. In the era after the fall of the Shang dynasty, it was basically a story of the restraint of virtues. Even the Qing dynasty had such a saying. After destroying the Ming dynasty of the Fire dynasty, they called themselves the Qing dynasty of the Water dynasty. This thing was very mysterious. When the Nurhaci dynasty was established, it belonged to the Jinda dynasty. Ning Yuanji was defeated by the Ming dynasty and changed the name of the dynasty to the Qing dynasty. However, it successfully replaced the Ming dynasty and became the last dynasty of the feudal period. In a world without superstition, this was just a coincidence or a man-made story. However, in the mythical world, it was definitely a big deal. In Taoist Red Cloud story, Zhou Yin, who was called Zhou Zi, was most likely the Grand Supreme sock puppet. After all, it was an indisputable fact that the school of Yin Yang originated from the school of Taoism. Taoism, on the other hand, came from the Grand Supreme's orthodoxy. Therefore, this wave was actually the Grand Supreme using a sock puppet to mess with the Heavenly Emperor. Zhou Yin came up with a set of theories about the five colored emperors and the five virtues. After spreading it in the human world, the five emperors officially became the five elders of the five directions. They took away a considerable part of the Heavenly Emperor's power and indirectly led to the fall of the Heavenly Emperor. What was more interesting was that the first emperor of the immortal Qin dynasty, who was called the Ancestral Dragon, was even laughed at for being a boneless person. Because of the prevalence of the school of Yin Yang, the state of Chu claimed that the descendants of the Yin Emperor belonged to the Earth virtue. The state of Yin claimed that they belonged to the Zhou royal family, but they came up with a series of reasons and claimed that they belonged to the Water virtue. At that time, all the other countries were like this, except for the state of Qin. This was because among the 7 kingdoms of the Warring States period, only the state of Qin did not clearly declare their own virtue. According to convention, the Great Qin should belong to the Fire virtue, and the entire country should be red. However, anyone who had a little understanding of history knew that the state of Qin was black. It was only after the state of Qin had swept through the other 6 countries that they suddenly turned around and claimed to be the Water virtue. This was completely in line with the theory of the 5 virtues. The state of Qin's actions were equivalent to making a fool out of the Heavenly Emperor. This was because when the 5 colored emperors were brought up, they were given the authority of the 5 seasons of winter and summer, wind and rain. This was equivalent to pushing the 5 emperors to the front, taking away a large portion of the Heavenly Emperor's authority. Of course, the Heavenly Emperor was not willing to do this, and he did not completely fall out with the Heavenly Emperor. As such, he could only act in the human world. Back then, the only country that did not declare its own virtue naturally became the Heavenly Emperor's supporter. Even though there were always some TV writers who said that Great Qin had conquered the world because it had too much food, it was true that Great Qin had conquered the world because of food. For example, many people blamed the state of Zhao's destruction on Zhao Kuo, who was an armchair strategist, but how many people knew that Zhao Kuo had actually taken the blame? Just like in the story of Journey to the West in the Phoenix Immortal County, because they had offended the Heavenly Emperor, there had been no rain for 3 years. The 3 countries, Yin, Zhao, and Han, had all encountered a great drought. The country of Zhao did not have enough food to sustain its army, so it could only replace Lianpa, who was in charge of defense, and let Zhao Kuo take over as the commander of the Battle of Chongping. This was to find an opportunity to fight a decisive battle with Great Qin. After all, during the Battle of Chongping, Zhao had still been able to come up with a plan to break out of the encirclement despite not having enough food for 46 days. What's more, the soldiers under his command were willing to follow him. This was not something that a general who was an armchair strategist could receive. No matter which world's army it was, they would only respect the strong. In this battle, the Heavenly Emperor had won by half a point. After Great Qin had swept through the 6 countries and unified the world, Ing Zheng, who was called the Ancestral Dragon, had tried to restore the human king system and stop boasting about his talent. Instead, he had created the title of Emperor. This action not only had the Heavenly Emperor been defeated by the Heavenly Emperor, but it had also offended many higher beings. That was why Great Qin had fallen for 2 generations. Lin Yuan's path of the ancient totem god was mainly about sacrifices. It was just that his cultivation had not reached the required level and he had not ignited his godly flame. So he had to borrow the system's power to perform sacrifices. However, he still had some understanding of this. The Zhou dynasty had fallen 800 years ago, and the marquises had fought for supremacy. The 7 heroes of the Warring States period, the 100 schools of thought, and Great Qin had swept through the 6 countries. This heart-rending drama in history had only been a battle between the Heavenly Emperor and the Heavenly Emperor. Apart from this, Lin Yuan suddenly realized that after the Yellow Emperor had ascended to the Heavenly Realm, only 2 people had not followed him. The Winged Dragon and Hitorigami had both used up most of their divine power and ascended to the Heavenly Realm. As such, one of them had wandered in the north and the other in the south. Compared to the Winged Dragon returning to the south, Hitorigami, who had been imprisoned in the Great Wasteland, was evidently the Yellow Emperor's last attempt to protect his daughter. Chapter 903. Hamba, who had been refined into a zombie, had become a walking disaster. No matter where she went, she would be beaten, scolded, and expelled. At this time, Hamba would find that without the protection of the Yellow Emperor, her achievements were gradually forgotten. Those who liked her would gradually disappear in the passage of time. All the beautiful things she had seen would gradually become a bubble in her memory. This was very sad. However, compared to ascending to the Heaven Realm, it was much better to become a pawn of the Grand Supreme. After all, the Hautian Emperor was the incarnation of heaven. He was the master of gods and the supreme god in the Heaven Realm. Even the Grand Supreme was nominally his subject. The Grand Supreme's action was no different from a rebellion. The 5 emperors were just a knife chosen by the Grand Supreme. The Yellow Emperor had no choice from the beginning. The only thing he could do was to keep his daughter away from this dispute. Whether she was hated by others or became a demon, it was much better than being inexplicably annihilated, wasn't it? Lin Yuan's eyelids twitched slightly. He also looked in the direction where Hamba disappeared and asked in confusion, "But the problem is, hasn't the outcome of that game been decided long ago? Why is Hamba still? Everything is fate. It's not up to people." Taoist Red Cloud shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "The creatures of the untainted land, the gods and Buddhas, the cultivators of qi refining, demons, ghosts, and even ordinary people have to be counted. All they want in their lives is freedom. However, there is only one person who can achieve this, who can guarantee that they will not become a pawn of others after a while. Since she is not in the game, why should we drag her into the game for the so-called truth?" Lin Yuan looked sideways and quietly waited for Taoist Red Cloud to continue. "It's rare to see someone like her in the entire untainted land. How many of us don't look forward to such a life? However, we all know that it's impossible. So, we are already very satisfied just by looking at her." Taoist Red Cloud's face turned solemn, and his tone was somewhat pleading. He continued, "I've lived for so long, and I've eaten more than anyone you've ever met. When you looked at Zhao before, your eyes were calm, but there was obviously killing intent. Just take it as I'm begging you. Unless the 2 sides really fight to the death, please don't kill this child." Lin Yuan awkwardly turned his gaze to the side. Due to the system's mission, Lin Yuan already harbored murderous intent towards Hitorigami. In addition, Hitorigami had been chasing and teasing him all this while. The murderous intent in his chest had almost solidified. However, it was difficult for the WIRM's face to show any expression. Even his gaze could be restrained so that others would not be able to see through him immediately. However, he did not expect Taoist Red Cloud to be able to observe him in such detail. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he slowly said, "My killing intent is not directed at her, but at the existence that is trying to turn the northern frontier into the underworld." Taoist Red Cloud nodded slightly, but did not continue on this topic. Previously, when he was divining the location of the Celestial Emperor, he had suffered a loss. The Celestial Emperor, who had been born long ago but had been holding back, was always under the protection of the will of the world. Now, although Lin Yuan was the first candidate to become the Underworld King, he was definitely not the one that the will of the world favored the most. That fellow who had caused the northern frontier to fall into such a state was most likely also under the protection of the will of the world. If he were to try to divine the other party's location, it would be difficult and unrewarding. At the same time, through Lei Fan's eyes, Lin Yuan saw for the first time what the outer deity who had caused chaos in the northern frontier looked like. This fellow had a body similar to a human's, except that his entire body was pitch black. Even his facial features could not be seen. Only a pair of eyes were a strange blood red. The way he had appeared was also very strange. He had slowly crawled out from Lei Fan's shadow. Furthermore, Lei Fan, who was engrossed in the scripture of life, obviously did not realize that his current boss had appeared by his side. He still maintained his previous posture and expression, constantly running and flashing around the surrounding forest. As for the outer deity, he did not have any intention of disturbing Lei Fan. Just like Lei Fan's shadow, he followed Lei Fan's movements and also constantly moved around with Lei Fan. He even tilted his head, his blood-red eyes obviously showing that he was thinking about something, Shadow Demon, Su Yin. Lin Yuan quickly thought about it in his mind. Very quickly, he connected this outer deity who was hiding in Lei Fan's shadow with a once famous evil god in the Tianwu continent. It was just that although this evil god was not very serious, as a member of the Yin god system, he was able to subdue the Shadow Walker and Sword Dancer, two organizations that were completely made up of assassins and killers. This was because this shadow demon could bestow upon his followers the ability to conceal themselves. Some of the more powerful killers could even hide in their target's shadow and deliver a fatal blow at the crucial moment. Therefore, many killers held the attitude that they would rather believe in the existence of this Su Yin in their own homes. Therefore, even if Su Yin did not have the support of the Empire's destiny, he could still walk freely under the sun. He could be considered as one of the stronger deities who had once shown their divinity in front of people. If he was targeted by this guy, it would be troublesome. After all, in the Tianwu world, Su Yan's position was definitely the ancestor of all killers. His assassination ability was imaginable. Previously, Lei Fan was able to transform into Li Zhong's appearance and disappear right under his nose. It should be Su Yan's ability, right? However, although this guy was a dark deity, no matter how one looked at it, he did not seem to have anything to do with the deities of the underworld. Why was this guy coveting the position of the Underworld King, luring that black Jiao into the forest of hungry ghosts, and even swindling a set of martial arts from it? That's interesting. Su Yan's voice rang out in Lin Yuan's consciousness. Under Lin Yuan's special attention, there was almost no delay at all. Moreover, even if Lin Yuan missed it, he would be able to use the universal life force to check the memories of these cultivators. He would not miss any details, and could even watch it repeatedly. Taking revenge on the Black Jiao is my goal. Now, you should tell me your goal, right? Lei Fan's voice rang out as well, his tone filled with dissatisfaction. It was most likely because his state of enlightenment had been disrupted by Su Yan. Enlightenment was something that could be said to be a common occurrence for cheaters. But to the majority of cultivators, they might not even encounter it more than a few times in their entire lives. Lei Fan being able to make use of the universal life force scripture to enter a state of enlightenment could be considered a great opportunity. But after Su Yin merged with his shadow, he was immediately jolted awake from his state of enlightenment. It would be strange if he did not have any resentment. Chapter 904. My goal? Su Yin pondered for a moment, then suddenly smiled and said, Of course, it is to kill that Black Jiao and obtain the position of King of Hell. Black Jiao? Is that what you were thinking now? Just as Su Yin finished speaking, Lin Yuan's expression changed, and he almost collapsed. But on second thought, the scripture of all living beings was after all a cultivation technique created by the great god Pan Gu. Even if all the almighty beings in the ancient times were the god of creation, strictly speaking, how many of them could be compared to the great god Pan Gu? All the big and small worlds added together, weren't they all based on the ancient times? Even if this cultivation technique was seen through by others, the other party would have to be at the same level as the great god Sky Demon. If not, it would have to be Hongjun, Sanqing, or other ancient almighty beings who had eaten the first batch of benefits after splitting open the heavens. Su Yin? A mere evil god of the sky martial arts sect. Was he worthy? He was just trying to trick me? Lin Yuan's eyes turned slightly. Then he calmed his mind again. What do you mean by that? Lei Fan's expected resentment dissipated slightly, and he asked doubtfully. After escaping from the forest of hungry ghosts, he had been feeling uneasy, as if Lin Yuan was always watching him. He had originally thought that it was just a psychological effect, but these words from Su Yan's mouth made him feel even more uneasy. After a moment of silence, Su Yan said slowly, It's all right, I was just trying to trick him. You said it before, that the Black Jiao had been suspicious of you ever since you appeared in front of him. No matter whether he realized it at the time, or slowly figured it out after the fact, it is hard to say what he has done to you. After all, the cultivation technique you are talking about is indeed strange and evil. I have lived for so many years, but I have never heard of a cultivation technique that can be changed by itself after being memorized to become a cultivation technique that is completely compatible with the user. This, Su Yin paused, as if organizing his words, before continuing, this does not seem to be an inanimate object like a cultivation technique. Previously, when I was traveling the world, I heard of an evil being in the Green River Southern Wastelands that had similar effects. Green River Southern Wastelands? Are you talking about? Lei Fan swallowed a mouthful of saliva and mumbled, Demon Venerable Qing Zhang's Gold Squandering Cave, Tender Village. The all-being scripture evolves according to the characteristics of all living beings. The evil creatures in the southern wasteland of the Green River have similar effects. This is interesting. Lin Yuan's gaze shifted as he muttered softly. The demon Venerable Qing Zhang's name was like thunder to the ears in the Tianwu continent. 300 years ago, he appeared out of nowhere and severely injured a group of Qing Jiang cultivators. Then, with a palm strike, he encircled almost the entire southern part of Xinjiang and named it the Southern Wasteland. Just like Lin Yuan's northern frontier, he established his own country. At the same time, he did not lose to the Xinjiang and Yun empires. In the past 300 years, he was definitely a legendary existence. The Xinjiang Empire was easy to deal with. After all, their entire country was proficient in water battles. Although the southern wasteland had many lakes, the demonic beasts there had a greater advantage. In addition, there were poisonous obstacles everywhere and the terrain was complicated. The Xinjiang army could not take down the southern wasteland, and the Xinjiang cultivators could not defeat the demon Venerable. However, the Yun Empire that bordered the Xinjiang was 80% swampy and forested land, similar to the terrain of Yunnan in Lin Yuan's previous life. Their soldiers were extremely proficient in fighting in such terrain, but they still could not take down the tough bone in the southern wasteland. What was even more legendary was that the Xinjiang and Yun empires had been fighting with the southern wasteland demon kingdom for so many years, but no one could say what kind of existence the demon Venerable was. Some said that the demon Venerable was actually a human, but he could mix with demonic beasts and command the demons in the southern wasteland. Some said that the demon Venerable was a tiger demon. After all, the palm strike that encircled the southern wasteland was a tiger claw. Some said that the demon Venerable was a demonic beast with dragon blood. He once smashed a monk in the Kongming realm with his dragon tail. These rumors about the appearance of the great demon Venerable came from the great cultivators who had fought with the demon Venerable. However, everyone had different opinions. No one thought that they were wrong, and there were even many people who fought and killed because of this. However, this mysterious demon Venerable was elusive. Although he raised countless demonic beasts, he formed his own lineage and had no connection with the Hengduan Mountains or the Endless Sea. Some people speculated that if the demon Venerable took one step further and took over the entire Qing River, he would form his own demon lineage. At that time, the three demon lineages would join forces and nearly a quarter of the world would fall into the hands of the demonic beasts. The scene of the demonic beasts running rampant in the continent in the past would probably happen again. However, the difference between him and Lin Yuan was that after this demon Venerable took over the southern wasteland, he restrained his ambition and no longer sought for an inch of land. Instead, he established two sacred places that everyone in the world spit on and yearned for. One was the Gold Squandering Cave, and the other was the Land of Warmth. When people mentioned these two places, they couldn't wait to destroy them. However, those who had been to these two places would linger and forget to return. Even when they were buried in a foreign land, they didn't mention the word regret. Let's talk about the Gold Squandering Cave first. It was originally an inconspicuous mountain forest in the southern wasteland. The demon Venerable used his supreme power to move the mountains and connect them to the demon lineage. He also set up 72 caves. It was known as the biggest underground market in the Tianwu continent. No matter if it was the cultivation world or the mortal world, as long as it was something with a name, it could be found in the Gold Squandering Cave's storehouse. Even those lost things that were lost by the predecessors or buried underground would occasionally appear. In addition, the demon Venerable also had a group of skilled craftsmen. No matter what it was, as long as it was in the Gold Squandering Cave, there was nothing that could not be replicated. Although most of these replicas were not as outstanding as the real thing, they were still worth the money. There were even many ancient records of sects that had lost their inheritance in the Gold Squandering Cave. It was the demon Venerable's armory that all the loose cultivators in the world yearned for. Every year, there would be some lost or newly created cultivation techniques or martial skills. As long as there were enough resources, even a loose cultivator could learn the secrets of the various sections. The remaining inheritances of the sects were not easy to learn. After all, if one was caught red-handed, the experts of the sects would cripple the person's cultivation. However, the inheritances of the sects that had lost their heirs, although they were expensive, every single copy that was printed could be said to be in short supply. In the entire Tianwu continent, it was hard to say which sect had not visited the Gold Squandering Cave to buy their lost ancient records or to learn from other sects' ancient records. In the past, Taoist red dust was a frequent customer of the Gold Squandering Cave. Or it could be said that the entire red dust assembly served Taoist red dust when he went to the Gold Squandering Cave to buy ancient records from various sections. The resources that flowed like water, other than the portion that was used to maintain the red dust assembly, were all sent to the Gold Squandering Cave. Other than the underground black market and the demon Venerable's armory, the Gold Squandering Cave also had all kinds of basic necessities. Even gambling houses, boxing arenas, and other facilities that were banned by the various great empires were not uncommon. It would often attract rich guests who threw away their money. Chapter 905. The Gold Squandering Den could be said to be the #1 underground black market in the Tianwu continent, as well as the #2 entertainment sacred ground in the Tianwu continent. Just based on the Gold Squandering Den, when the flow of customers was high, the profits of a single day were comparable to the profits of the Chamber of Commerce in a month when Lin Yuan first opened up the market for controlling spiritual items. A full 300 years. One could imagine how wealthy that demon Venerable was. After talking about the Gold Squandering Den, it was time to talk about the Gentle Village. Because of this existence, Lin Yuan had noticed demon Venerable Qing Jiang, who had rarely appeared in the past 300 years. This was because Li Zhong would occasionally go to the Black Water Dragon King Temple to pray and contact Lin Yuan, saying that demon Venerable Qing Jiang was attempting to open a gentle village branch in the northern frontier. If not for the demon the Arch Association's ability and Luo Su's ruthlessness, the gentle village branch in the northern frontier would have been completed. As the #1 entertainment sacred ground in the Tianwu continent, the gentle village was actually a brothel. The ladies there were proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Other than that, there were also demi-humans with mixed blood, slaves from the various empires, and even some chivalrous men and women from the mortal world. As long as the customer made a request, the gentle village would satisfy the customer, regardless of male or female. As long as one went to the gentle village to seek pleasure, they would no longer be interested in ordinary women. They would go to the gentle village again and again, and it could be said that they enjoyed themselves so much that they forgot to return. Other than that, the drinks and dishes in the gentle village came from all over the world. Regardless of whether it was the famous wine or the home-brewed wine, the menu was complete. The chefs working there were also famous existences in the world. Any dish that was sold to the mortal world would be worth tens of thousands of gold. Even if the nobles of the various empires wanted to eat it, they would have to go through a lot of trouble. Furthermore, the gentle village did not require money. Even if a penniless beggar entered the gentle village, he would be able to enjoy the treatment that even the emperor would not be able to enjoy. But as the saying goes, lust is a bone-shaving knife. The land of warmth and tenderness indeed didn't require money because what was collected there wasn't money or spiritual items, but the essence, energy, and spiritual essence unique to every living being. When a human's spiritual essence was damaged, they would wither and become seriously ill. Even cultivators were the same. Losing a little bit of spiritual essence would decrease the efficiency of their cultivation. If their spiritual essence was depleted, they would die on the spot no matter how high their cultivation was. The spiritual essence of demonic beasts was the same. If they lost half of their spiritual essence, they would return to their original form and become wild beasts. If they lost all of their spiritual essence, they would die on the spot. The extracted spiritual essence was not wasted either. It was all refined into various elixirs by the demon Venerable. Some of them were used to supplement one's innate spiritual essence. Even those who had no cultivation aptitude could embark on the path of cultivation after eating this kind of elixir. The more they ate, the better their aptitude would be. Some of them were used to prolong one's life. Every elixir that entered the market would be snatched up. Such elixirs were sold by the pill. Any one of them would be equal to the total income of the gold squandering cave for half a year, or even more. When people talked about the land of warmth and tenderness, they would definitely curse, wishing that they could destroy that dirty place. But the number of customers who went to the land of warmth and tenderness increased, and the elixirs refined by the land of warmth and tenderness became more and more popular. If there was anyone in the Sky Martial continent that didn't do business with the land of warmth and tenderness, it would be the northern frontier. The northern frontier was in need of money, but this kind of money, regardless of whether it was Lin Yuan or Li Zhong, they disdained to earn it. In the eyes of the great spirit demon Venerable, regardless of whether it was a human or a demonic beast, there was no difference. They were just livestock that were being raised. They continued to bring all kinds of treasures and cultivation techniques into the gold squandering cave, causing the business of the gold squandering cave to become more and more prosperous. Their inventory grew more and more, and their reputation grew bigger and bigger. There were even people who went to the land of warmth and tenderness, like lambs jumping into a fire pit, allowing the demon Venerable to refine them into elixirs that were sold at high prices. This was never a secret. It was just that no one had ever seen the true form of the demon Venerable, and no one could punish the demon Venerable. Even the guardian of the heavenly gate didn't care. No one knew if it was because they had suffered a loss from the demon Venerable, or if the demon Venerable was like Lin Yuan, giving them a large amount of benefits, and thus didn't want to care about it. Looking at the legends and novels, most of the almighty people saw the people as livestock. When a piece was placed, no matter how many innocent people were implicated, they would not be moved at all. In the journey to the west, the Heavenly Emperor was able to prevent rain from falling for 3 years because the governor of Fengxian County had knocked over his tribute. How could he have imagined what kind of purgatory Fengxian County would become after 3 years? Some people said that these almighty people were heartless and treated the people as grass, and that they themselves were beast-like existences. But the current Lin Yuan had a different view. After all, he was half a step into the realm of almighty people. It was just that he still had some stubbornness in his heart. Furthermore, he had not cultivated for a long time, so he seemed to have some human characteristics and still had some bottom line. To be more realistic, most of the cultivators came from the mortal world. But once they succeeded in their cultivation, they were different from immortals and mortals. They could go into seclusion for more than 100 years. By the time they came out of seclusion, most of the people they knew would have turned into dust. So, what if their bloodline was still in the world? Those people were no longer people they knew. Year after year, the human side of them became less and less. In the end, they became people who had forgotten their emotions. If it were those ordinary people, they would not give up the benefits that they could easily obtain for some people they did not know. Just like Lin Yuan, when he first came to this world, although he had the body of a demonic beast, he still thought of himself as a human. In order to survive, he could eat wild beasts and demonic beasts alive. He would also save a human because of a moment of kindness. But now, Lin Yuan found it hard to convince himself that he was still a human. Of course, he still had some conscience and bottom line, so he set up the new law of the Northern Frontier. He wanted to build a world where humans and demonic beasts lived together. However, it was expected that as he grew older, Lin Yuan's human side would quickly fade away. Perhaps one day in the future, he would also become an existence that regarded human life as worthless. Just like the game between Taishang and Haotian, the Great Qin Empire wiped out the 6 countries, and countless fresh lives were turned into yellow soil and withered bones. Perhaps one day, he would also be like that, playing a game with an unknown existence. With a single thought, countless ordinary people would pay the price of their lives. Perhaps there was a trace of unwillingness. Therefore, Lin Yuan did his best to build the Northern Frontier, set up the Willowstone Ocean, and built the things that he was familiar with in his previous life. He wanted to leave behind more karma and do his best to preserve his human side. How sad would it be to exist purely as a god? Chapter 906. But Lin Yuan was still quite interested in the news of Qin Zhang's southern desolation. Not to mention that Qin Zhang Demon Venerable wanted to extend his hand into the northern frontier. Even if he stayed in southern desolation, Lin Yuan would find a way to find trouble with him. Once Willow Sure Sea Area's city of trade was established, with his previous life's business philosophy, the convenient transportation formation, and the absolutely safe logistics, he would be able to sweep through the endless sea in a short time. Then he would be able to enter the outer sea area without competing with those demon beasts for territory. Just like the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce in Hung Duan Mountain Range, he would be able to easily open a trade route. At that time, all the enemies in front of him would have to be dealt with cleanly. Xinwu Dynasty's southern desolation would have to be in his hands, and he would also have to take down Qin Jiang Imperial Dynasty, who was proficient in naval warfare, to ensure that the things he transported from the endless sea would not be intercepted. That demon Venerable in southern desolation was naturally on the list of people to kill. That's right, southern desolation has always been famous for its goo techniques. Many of my subordinates had once gone to Gold Squandering Cave to buy evil goo, and among them, there was a goo item that had a similar effect. It resides in the host's body and can continuously read the host's memories and transmit them to the Goo Master of Southern Desolation. At that time, the Goo Master of Southern Desolation would contact the guard of Demon Venerable's arsenal and choose a suitable cultivation method to transmit to the host through the goo item. When the host obtains a suitable cultivation method, his cultivation would naturally advance by leaps and bounds. But as the evil goo grows bigger, its appetite would naturally increase as well. At first, the evil goo would only occasionally steal a trace of primeval qi into the stomach, but once it matures, it would swallow all the primeval qi and astral qi in the host's body, even going deep into the Chi Sea and completely eating the host into a cripple. After that, this demonic goo will hibernate in the host's body for half a year. If the host remains a cripple in this half a year, the demonic goo will leave the Dantian Chi Sea and eat the host's body until it becomes an empty shell. Then the goo masters of Southern Desolation will retrieve it. If the host has a fortuitous encounter, the demonic goo will copy the fortuitous encounter and send it back to the demon Venerable's arsenal, then devour the host completely. It can be said to be extremely cruel. Su Yan's voice was somewhat cold as he smiled and said, "Your current situation is similar to an evil parasite entering your body. I heard that the Black Jiao had caused quite a commotion in the Endless Sea. If it obtains this evil parasite, you won't be able to endure it." "Then, what should I do now?" Lei Fan's voice was trembling, as though he was extremely terrified. However, Su Yin smiled disdainfully and said mockingly, "The so-called Gu art is just a small Dao. If Gu art is really that powerful, how can orthodox cultivators run amok? It is only the Southern Desolation that has a strange terrain and climate that allows Gu worms to breed. If you can suppress the greed in your heart and not cultivate that cultivation technique, the demonic Gu will not be awakened. As time passes, the demonic Gu will naturally starve to death and will not harm your life. But when that demonic Gu dies, your cultivation technique will have no foundation and will automatically disperse from your sea of consciousness." To a cultivator, cultivation methods were absolutely crucial. Because of an incomplete secular scripture, Taoist Red Cloud had been stuck at half-step void nether realm for half his life. Every year, he had to invest real gold and silver into the money-squandering cave to see if he could complete secular assembly. After meeting Lin Yuan, he did not even have to think about it and bet secular assembly on it. Moreover, the cultivation techniques deduced from secular assembly scripture, regardless of their grade, were the most suitable for the cultivator. If one cultivated according to the scripture, as long as one was not born with a crippled body, their cultivation efficiency would be doubled with half the effort, and their battle strength would far surpass those of the same stage. If Lei Fan was willing to give up on such a cultivation technique, that would be strange. Such a temptation was not something that anyone could resist. "May I ask the exalted deity, is there any other way?" Lei Fan raised an eyebrow and clasped his hands together towards Su Yin, who had come out from the shadows, his eyes filled with unwillingness. He was a descendant of the imperial family of the Xinwu dynasty. Even if he was from a side branch, his eyesight was extraordinary. Although his cultivation was not deep, but he knew clearly how rare the cultivation technique in his sea of consciousness was. He could even say with certainty that if he missed out on such an opportunity, he would not be able to find another cultivation technique that was on par with it in his entire life. The same light laughter came from Lin Yuan and Su Yin at the same time. Having said that, Lin Yuan could see through Su Yan's tricks. Not to mention whether the Southern Wasteland sinister Gu really existed, Su Yin was obviously coveting the cultivation technique of secular assembly scripture. After all, after entering the host's body, it could automatically evolve into a cultivation technique that was suitable for the host. Only Lin Yuan, who had cultivated the real secular assembly scripture, could only covet it. Otherwise, if such an opportunity was placed in front of him, he would not let it go so easily. Relax your mind and let me enter your sea of consciousness to explore and see what kind of cultivation technique the Black Jiao had imparted to you is. At the same time, I will see if there are any goo worms in your body. If there are, I will kill them for you. But I will not completely remove them. I will wait until you have recorded down the cultivation technique in your sea of consciousness before I will completely remove them. What do you think?" Su Yin spread out his two black palms and said with a smile, "Of course, you can also take it that I am coveting your cultivation technique. So, you can totally reject me. But this is your only chance. You will have to bear all the consequences." Lin Yuan could disconnect the connection of the secular assembly scripture at any time to ensure that Su Yin would not be able to find any trace of it. But thinking about it, the secular assembly scripture was a two-way thing. Don't look at how others who cultivated the secular assembly scripture would get a cultivation technique that was specially tailored for them. But just like that gentle village, there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. You have to give up something to gain something. Those who cultivated the secular assembly scripture would become one of the living beings. As long as he had accumulated enough power of the living beings, Lin Yuan would be able to replicate everything of Su Yin. Even if he could not use these things as he wished, at least he would be able to understand how powerful his enemy was. As the saying goes, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will not be defeated in 100 battles. Who would give up a chance to study their opponent thoroughly? On the other side, Lei Fan thought about it for a moment and finally made up his mind. He said in a deep voice, I am ready. May the exalted deity please check if there are any goo worms in my body. Very quickly, a strange force penetrated deep into the secular assembly scripture. Obviously, Su Yan's actions were faster than Lin Yuan had expected, and he was also more impatient. Almost at the same time, Lei Fan's voice fell. He had already made his move, wanting to get his hands on this strange cultivation technique. However, Lin Yuan was thinking about another thing at this time. Shadow Demon Su Yin, why did he have the method to create immortals? Chapter 907. When Su Yin invaded Lei Fan's Sea of Consciousness, it was just as Lin Yuan had expected. The first thing Su Yin did was not to check on Lei Fan. Instead, Su Yin went straight for the ball of information that recorded the contents of the life scripture. After completely copying it down, Su Yin did not cultivate it immediately. Instead, he turned his head and started to continuously channel energy into Lei Fan's body, checking if there were any abnormalities within Lei Fan's body. Lin Yuan muttered to himself for a moment before he finally understood the reason behind Su Yan's actions. A cultivation technique of the level of the life scripture was something that even gods would not be able to avoid coveting. However, what Su Yin had said about the southern wasteland evil goo should not be baseless. After obtaining this cultivation technique, he naturally would not cultivate it immediately. Other than checking on Lei Fan, he also wanted to see if there were any abnormalities after Lei Fan cultivated it. This kind of action was in line with the style of an evil god. After all, the power of incense was the most precious resource in a world. Those high and mighty big shots, in order to prevent more fake gods from appearing and competing with them for the power of incense, had set up a threshold causing the cultivation realm of the heaven martial world to stop at the void realm. They had also divided the human factions into different empires. Every expert of the Heaven's Gate Guardian should have a territory where they could harvest the power of incense. Those resources that they had plundered were only for the sake of nurturing their own juniors. Whether or not they had it, they did not really care. However, the power of incense was different. Even the powerful dragon race of the Four Seas could only breed their own tribes to obtain the power of incense. It was even more so for the human race, whose forces were intertwined with one another. If they did not even have enough for themselves, how could they share it with other cultivators? This was especially so for someone like Su Yin, who was not a Heaven's Gate Guardian. He had found another way to obtain the faith of the assassins of the Heaven Martial World. However, this was still considered as competing with the real big shots for incense. If he did not have an exquisite heart, he would have long been killed by others. It seemed like there wouldn't be any harvest in the near future. Lin Yuan sighed faintly and wrapped his arms around Lei Qiuxing's shoulders again. Let's go back first and go our separate ways after we pass through the forest of hungry ghosts. You go to the Wei River battle line and tell them to leave some emergency personnel behind. There's no need to waste everyone there. The demon cult in the south is most likely done for. Without these allies, the Sky Demon won't let go of this fat piece of meat in the south. They won't do something as stubborn as biting down on the northern frontier. Therefore, other than those on duty, everyone should immediately go to the northern frontier prince's residence and await orders. Lei Qiuxing nodded slightly. His figure moved, and he once again swept in the direction of the forest of hungry ghosts. Yang Qinglin stood in place silently for a moment. He stretched out his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. With a flip of his right hand, He tightly clenched a small, broken, blood-colored banner and cursed. This time, it's a big loss. Putting the small, blood-colored banner back into his sleeve, Yang Qinglin took 2 deep breaths. He turned into a blood-colored streak of light and chased after Lei Qiuxing, who was gradually getting further and further away. After the group had completely left, only then did Red Cloud open his eyes and look at Luo Yu, who was flying in the sky. He jokingly said, "Did you see that? That guy is showing off." Luo Yu was silent for a moment. He sneered and said, "That guy is one of the fragments of the Six-Soul Banner. Although it's not as powerful as it used to be, it's getting more and more terrifying in the world of heaven and martial arts. If he really wrote our names on it, I'm afraid that he would immediately be erased from the world of heaven and martial arts and lose his life." The Six-Soul Banner was a treasure that was very difficult to grade. It used to be the most precious treasure of Tontian. By writing the opponent's name on the tail of the banner, he would use a talisman to worship it in the morning and evening. On the day of worship, he would wave the banner and change the world of heaven and earth. A complete Six-Soul Banner with 6 tails could take away the lives of 6 people. Even the immortal saints could not escape the fate. In the original Book of Investiture of the Gods, Tontian wrote the names of Jiayin Daoist, Zhuni Daoist, Laozi, Yuanshi, Qingwu, and Jiangshang on the tail of the banner. Among the 6 people, there were 4 saints. It could be seen that the power of this treasure was enormous. It could even be said that the 10,000 Immortals formation was not the killing move of Jie's sect, but the Six-Soul Banner was. However, Tontian lost in the end. Long Ears Dingguang Immortal, who was responsible for waving the banner after the 10,000 Immortals formation was activated, defected and joined the camp of Yuanshi Tianzuan together with the Six-Soul Banner. As a result, Jie's sect, which was not inferior to Ren's sect and Chan's sect, was dragged into the calamity. Only Divine Mother, who was not tainted by the calamity, escaped under the hint of Tontian. In the investiture of the gods' tribulation, if Long Ears Dingguang Immortal really waved the banner, he dared not say that Jie's sect would definitely win, but it was still unknown who would win. However, as a forbidden treasure, the Six-Soul Banner could not be used casually. Every time the banner was waved, part of the holder's primordial spirit would be devoured by the resentment of the 3,000 demon gods. In the last battle of Jie's sect, the 10,000 Immortals formation was their trump card. The participants could be said to have a slim chance of survival. However, those who waved the Six-Soul Banner would definitely die. Moreover, their primordial spirit would be devoured, and they could not even enter the reincarnation cycle. Unless a saint paid a great price to reconstruct their true spirit, only then could they enter the reincarnation cycle. Although Long Ears Dingguang Immortal's escape had caused Jie's sect to suffer, his escape was not purely because he was afraid of death. What was more terrifying than death was having one soul dispersed and not entering the reincarnation cycle. Jie's sect, TSK, Daoist Red Cloud shook his head. His face was gloomy as he said coldly, "They're all difficult to deal with. However, I don't know if this kid had obtained a fragment of the Six-Soul Banner by chance, or if it was a spark that Tontian's sect master had placed in another world in advance because he knew that he could not suppress the fate of Jie's sect." Although the blood-red banner in Yang Qinglin's hand was only a fragment of the Six-Soul Banner, it was definitely an invincible existence in the current Tianwu world. If Yang Qinglin was really angered, he could wave the Six-Soul Banner and exchange a life for a life. Even Daoist Red Cloud would be wiped out directly. Then Luo Yu seemed to have thought of something as his eyelids twitched violently. Daoist Red Cloud raised his right hand and stopped Luo Yu from speaking. He said indifferently, "Although we don't have a good relationship with the Black Jiao, the Black Jiao had borrowed the name of the Demon Court. Today we saved his life. This karma has already been set. Even if we don't do anything now, if the Heavenly Tao wants to get rid of us in the future, he will have to protect us?" At this point, Daoist Red Cloud took back the 99 soul dissipating gourd that was hovering above his head and hung it on his waist again. His eyes shone brightly as he turned to the east and said in a deep voice, "After the northern frontier recuperates, the Black Jiaos lay out in the south, and the endless sea will be set. The mortal world will usher in a great reshuffle. When the time comes, the world will change, and a batch of those who do nothing can be cleaned up. Luo Yu opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Taoist Red Cloud added, "The Black Jiao did not accept the king of Hell's throne today because he has not accumulated enough power for the time being. Do you really think that this world can enjoy peace forever?" Chapter 908. Taoist Red Cloud clasped his hands behind his back, as if he had seen through the river of time. He said with great certainty, "When the Black Jiao becomes powerful, not only will the will of this world want him to accept the position of Yama, he himself will not miss such an opportunity. At that time, the only difference for us will be whether the primitive sage enters the sky martial arts, or the Black Jiao takes the initiative to lead the underworld and merge the sky martial arts into the untainted land. Then, like Luo Ho, he will fight with that person again. I'm just worried that the Black Jiao has entered the tribe of Jiism. You know, he is not a human now, nor does he have congenital qi. But he came from the afterlife formed by the original fragment of the heavenly way," Luo Yu added in a muffled voice. The bloody battle between the tribe of Jiism and the tribe of Chan was the battle between Zhou and Shang. Shun Gongbao, a disciple of the tribe of Jiism, entered Jiaoge as the national master and recruited Taoist friends to help the Yinshang judge the rebels of Shiqi. The last king of the Yinshang was called the emperor after the Zhou dynasty. At that time, the heavenly way had been stolen by Hongjun. Therefore, the four sages of the three religious sects fought with the Tongtian hierarch not because the tribe of Jiism was indiscriminate, but because Hongjun could not tolerate the existence of the human king. Coincidentally, in Lin Yuan's original world, there were no immortals, Buddhas, nor the emperor. After all, it was a world ruled by the human king. In a sense, Lin Yuan and the tribe of Jiism were indeed fated, and it was not the same kind of fate as the Western religious sect. As soon as he finished speaking, Taoist Red Cloud fell silent. Before Yang Qinglin showed the six-hole banner, they would not have such concerns. After all, the tribe of Jiism was a thing of the past. The tribulation taker had either joined other sects or entered the list of deification and became enslaved. But Yang Qinglin probably had some relationship with the tribe of Jiism. Otherwise, he would not have been able to get a fragment of the six-soul banner. Such a variable appeared beside Lin Yuan. If they continued to be indifferent and let the tribe of Jiism take Lin Yuan under their banner, it would be a big joke. I'll go talk to that person. You stay at the northern frontier and keep an eye on him. If he makes any strange movements, you know what to do." Taoist Red Cloud snorted. He swung his blood-red sleeves and said coldly, "No matter how powerful the Jie school is, I don't believe that the disciples of the Jie school in this world can set up a 10,000 immortals formation to kill us. Outside the endless space-time, in the untainted world, an old man in a snow-white robe was sitting cross-legged on a barren cliff. He suddenly opened his eyes, and thousands of illusions flickered in his eyes. After a while, the old man stroked his beard and smiled. "Old friend, congratulations on coming out of seclusion." A cold light suddenly appeared in the sky. A handsome young man in a gray robe stood above the clouds. He held a red gourd in his right hand and looked at the old man in white. The corner of the young man's mouth kept rising. Not long after, he laughed and said, "During the God investiture tribulation, you plotted against me. If it weren't for the protection of the treasure, I wouldn't have seen the day of your tribulation. If you don't come out of seclusion today, I'm afraid you'll forget about me, right? Hongjun, your death is coming." Hongjun was still stroking his beard and smiling. It seemed that he had no intention of refuting the other party. The young man in a gray robe was also smiling. The shadow slowly dissipated and escaped into nothingness. No trace of him could be found. Hongjun's face turned cold. He slowly raised his right hand. His whole palm was smooth and white, without any wrinkles. It was a great contrast to his old appearance. Hongjun didn't do anything. He just gently waved his hand, and an old man in a red robe was pinched in his hand. His black and white eyes fell on the old man's face. He didn't say anything and just stared at the old man coldly. The old man laughed dryly. His wrinkled face was full of flattery smile. He said resentfully, "Tao ancestor, please don't be angry. Tao ancestor, please don't be angry. It's not that I'm going easy on you. It's just that you know that thing has been running all over the world these years and has set up many spies. Now it has joined forces with a group of traitors who escaped from the untainted land. Its power is growing day by day. It's not difficult to find them, but to find exactly what you want it can't be rushed at all. It can only be done slowly. It's all fate. All fate. 3 days." Hongjun set a time limit indifferently. Then he released his right hand and flicked his sleeve. He said expressionlessly, "Either you find that kid in 3 days, and I'll give you a wisp of Hong Ming purple chi to help you become a saint. From then on, you can be free from the control of the Western sect. Otherwise, I'll personally peel you out of the nether blood, see 3 days later, and use the divine fire of 6 to refine your primordial spirit for 10,000 years." The old man opened his mouth with a bitter face. However, before he could speak, Hongjuan's figure had already turned into clouds and dissipated. 3 days in the untainted land was not short. In the small world that existed with the untainted land as the foundation, it was from 1 to 3 years. If it was out of the untainted land and placed in other worlds, the conversion would be more complicated. It could be short or long. He had once seen a small world. 10,000 years, and it was equivalent to 1 day in the untainted land. However, even so, he did not have the slightest confidence in the task that Hongjun had given him. There were countless small and big worlds that existed with the untainted land, and there were even more small and big worlds that were created on their own. Not to mention that he was not a saint. Even if he had the saint fruit, it was impossible for him to thoroughly search these small and big worlds under the nose of the fragment of the heavenly Tao. Not to mention, the task that Hongjun had given him this time was not to find the people in those worlds who had been chosen by the fragment of the heavenly Tao. Instead, it was to accurately search for an individual. This was because not long ago, a major event that shocked the entire untainted land had happened. The Tao ancestor Hongjuan's death trial had appeared. Hongjun joined forces with the 6 sages to deduce this matter, but they still only saw fog. Even if Hongjun took out the jade plate of good fortune and even borrowed part of the power of the heavenly Tao, he could only deduce that the target was related to the dragon tribe. Not long after, the untainted land was in chaos. Various forces attacked the dragon tribe. Since the dragon tribe's vitality had been greatly damaged after the initial tribulation of the Dragon Han dynasty, they were almost exterminated in this turmoil. The powerful figures either died or were sealed. Only some of the descendants who had not yet matured were left alive. After all, the karma of exterminating a tribe was too great. Even someone as strong as Hongjun was not willing to be contaminated. However, what was even more strange was that even though the dragon tribe had suffered such a disaster, Hongjuan's death trial did not show any signs of dissipating. Instead, it became even more intense. Hongjun then deduced that this death trial came from the world outside the untainted land. Therefore, all the powerful figures who were responsible for searching, cultivation methods, and other worlds that were not ruled by the untainted land were all given similar orders. In particular, the Nether River ancestor, who had enlightened countless grievances floating in the Nether Blood Sea, was a powerful figure who had invaded all the worlds for the Sky Demon. Hongjun had high hopes for him. Chapter 909. 4 hours later. Shunning City, Northern Frontier Prince's Mansion. Lin Yuan, who was not much bigger than a small snake, was coiled up on a soft cushion. His different-colored eyes flashed as his cold gaze swept across the familiar and unfamiliar faces. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, he suddenly felt a sudden impulse. The depths of his sea of consciousness seemed to be enveloped by a cold current, instantly covering his entire body. Danger! Extreme danger! Ever since Lin Yuan was born in this world, he had never felt such a strong sense of danger. It was different from the chill he felt when he was being stared at by other monsters in the Hengduan Mountains. It was more like the next moment the sky would collapse and the earth would cave in. Lin Yuan believed in his intuition very much because this sense of crisis had saved him countless times. Therefore, at this moment, Lin Yuan also closed his eyes. His divine sense was constantly rolling in the unseen world, looking for the source of this unknown crisis, but he still found nothing. Lord Dragon King, a soft call awakened Lin Yuan from his meditative state. Lin Yuan opened his eyes and saw Li Zhong dressed in black armor. After not seeing him for a while, Li Zhong's scholarly aura had faded a lot, especially during this period of time when the Sky Demon was invading the north. Although Li Zhong was not on the front lines, he stayed in the army camp day and night, eating and living with the soldiers. His body looked much stronger, and there was a hint of killing intent in his eyes. Lin Yuan nodded slightly, trying his best to suppress the uneasiness in his heart. He said in a low voice, "What is the current situation of the northern frontier? Tell me in detail." Although he had asked the same question previously, but that information had come from Lei Fan after all. Even though he couldn't say that it was all fabricated by Lei Fan, he was sure that it wouldn't be as detailed as what Li Zhong knew, and it wouldn't be as credible as what he had heard from Li Zhong himself. This subordinate is incompetent. I've used almost all of the trump cards you've left behind in order to withstand the onslaught of the heavenly demons. Fortunately, the things you've prepared beforehand are extremely effective against the heavenly demons. The Wei River battlefront is now impregnable. However, your subordinate was overconfident and tried to block the Sky Demon side on the other side of the Wei River to prevent them from causing chaos in the northern frontier. But I did not expect to suffer a great defeat. Not only did I lose a lot of men, even old Marshal Yin Xingqi was caught in the Sky Demon's attack. Please punish me, Dragon King. Also, I heard that there was an empress in the south of the Shenwu dynasty. Her name is Guan Zhaoshan. Although she has disappeared, your subordinate is sure that she is not an ordinary person. In the past 20 years, the most talented person I have seen is you, Dragon King, and the other is the Empress in the south. Both of them rose to power as ordinary people and grew rapidly in a short period of time, becoming powerful people who could command the wind and the clouds. Other than her talent, this woman is also very scheming. She used the Red Dust Society to stir up the entire southern green forest. She used force to subdue them, enticing them with benefits. She used all kinds of methods to gain control of the entire southern green forest. She uprooted all the forces that did not submit to her and set up rules to unite the forces of the southern green forest to fight against the demon sect. With the help of the Ether Society, she formed the Great Alliance of the Southern Cultivation World. Now, the demon sect is on the brink of destruction. Due to the changes in the south, the Sky Demon had no choice but to give up on the plan to continue moving north. He only left a portion of his troops to continue confronting us, while the main force moved south at top speed. Your subordinate guesses that they either do not wish for the demon sect to be destroyed, or they want to take advantage of the conflict between the snipe and the clam to reap the benefits. It will be very difficult for them to move north to attack us in the near future. Also, this Guan Zhaoshan, according to the secret treasure of the embroidered uniform guard, it is said that she has used the safe house more than once and has the backing of the Ether Society. However, looking through the embroidered uniform guard roster, I have never seen the name Guan Zhaoshan. Thus, your subordinate guesses that this woman is most likely one of Zhang Xiu's people. When the Dragon King returns north, if he has the time, he can go south and bring this woman back. Such a talent should not be destroyed in the war in the south. Zhang Xiu cupped his hands in salute to Lin Yuan. His expression was somewhat gloomy as he added, "We suffered a great defeat before. Now, your subordinate knows that the Sky Demon's main force has moved south, but I still can't make up my mind. I don't know if I should go south and annex the Central Plains or sit on the northern frontier and continue to observe." Empress? A trace of obvious doubt appeared in Lin Yuan's eyes. He had indeed used some means to integrate the southern green forest and set up the rule of 2 kill, 2 die. He also wanted to use the southern green forest to stir up the flames of war between the demon sect and the southern cultivation world. However, after doing the groundwork, Lin Yuan had put aside the matters there and returned to his main body in the endless sea to fight against the old rulers. He did not pay attention to the subsequent developments. But now it seemed the situation in the south seemed to be more favorable than he had imagined. But the problem was, who was the empress? Cough. Clearing his throat, Lin Yuan threw away the distracting thoughts in his mind and said in a deep voice, Guan Zhaoshan is not one of Zhang Xiu's people. She is... Forget it. I know what to do. You don't have to pay attention to this person anymore. However, you can send a message to our spies in the south. If Guan Zhaoshan asks, they must help her at all costs. After giving a simple explanation, Lin Yuan sat up again and said with a faint smile, But what you have to report to me now shouldn't be just this, right? If the northern frontier was just a problem with the sky demon, it wouldn't be like this now. Sorry, Dragon King, there are too many things to report. I haven't finished yet, and you came back too suddenly. As a Heaven Dipper realm cultivator who was immune to cold and heat, Li Zhong couldn't help but shiver when facing Lin Yuan. He said carefully, So, I can only say what I think and try to pick the important things to tell you. Otherwise, Dragon King, please allow me to leave for a while and organize a written report before reporting to you, Dragon King? If it was peacetime, Li Zhong would be able to deal with it in an orderly manner even if there were major issues in various places. However, the northern frontier was currently at war with the immortals. They had to support the monsters in the Stenetland forest and their allies. The Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce also had to continue operating. Going south, they had to confront the Sky Demon. Donglan City was building a great wall to guard against the Frost Mirror Barbarian attacks at all times. On the other side of the Wei River, they had to station troops to guard against the Azure River Empire's army or the subordinates of the Southern Wasteland's great monster, Venerable, sneaking into the northern frontier. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were enemies of the entire world. During this period of time, Li Zhong had been staying in the military camp. He only had the energy to solve one problem after another and assign suitable people to suitable positions. He didn't have the time to deal with these written problems, nor did he have the time to categorize, organize, and record them according to the timeline. When Lin Yuan asked, he did seem to be a little flustered. Chapter 9-10. The Sky Demon's move to the south is a foregone conclusion. This is within my expectations, so there's no need to go into detail. What I want to hear is the recent situation of the northern frontier. For example, the territories that are still under our control, the recent personnel changes in the various departments, and so on. Seeing Li Zhong's frown, Lin Yuan pondered for a moment, and then indifferently skipped the matter. The recent situation of the northern frontier is still fine. When we first discovered the Undyings, their numbers weren't many. However, it was different from the current Undyings. At that time, the Undyings all had spiritual intelligence and were much more difficult to deal with than the current Undyings. We originally planned to capture a group of them, but not long after, the Undyings suddenly used some spies from the Restoration North Society to create chaos in Shunning City. They took advantage of the chaos to attack our Northern Frontiers Ministry of Works. Although the Ministry of Works relied on their strong city walls and sharp weapons to block the Undyings outside the secret areas until reinforcements arrived, those Undyings that were captured by us were all rescued. After that, the Shifter Emperor tried his best to track them down, but he lost track of the Undyings near the Hungduan Mountains. A period of time after that, the Hungduan Mountains underwent a strange change. We lost contact with the Stoneclaw Forest, and only a few shifter beasts managed to escape. However, they only managed to say that the Undyings and Inferno beasts were running amok in the Hungduan Mountains. All the tribes suffered heavy losses, and they couldn't escape due to the various human empires, so they could only struggle to survive. Not long after that, the Beast Lord Kirin fought with a mysterious expert in the Shifter Palace. Both sides fought for 3 days and 3 nights. At first, they were evenly matched, but then the Inferno beasts attacked en masse. The Beast Lord Kirin couldn't fight alone, so he had to retreat while fighting. Under the protection of 3 great Beast Lords, he barely escaped to Shunning City. By the time he escaped to Shunning City, Only the severely injured and unconscious beast Lord Kirin and the honed Ice Wolf King had one of his legs chopped off or left. It was said that the Sacred Heart Ape King had fallen, and the colorful Snake Queen had led her troops to bring up the rear. There hasn't been any news about the Hengduan mountain range. Moreover, the Association of the Demon Emperor, the Imperial Secret Service, and the MI7 had sent many spies into the Hengduan mountain range. However, the strange thing was that none of the spies who went in came out alive. The caravans from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce were able to pass through the Hengduan mountain range smoothly. They had a lot of goods and profits, but their memories seemed to have been erased by someone. We tried all kinds of methods, but we couldn't get any information about the Hengduan mountain range. If the Sky Demon hadn't invaded the Northern Territory, I would have personally led a team to the Hengduan mountain range. Li Zhong cupped his fists. It seemed that the silence from before had cleared up his thoughts, and his speech had started to become smoother. The first undying beings had spiritual intelligence? This was not possible. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes, and he started to think carefully. There were many names for the undying beings, but in the end, there were only 3 types of undying beings: corpse, bone, and soul. In his previous life, there was a theory about the conservation of energy in the Western world. In ancient China, there was also a theory that no matter how many changes there were, they would still remain the same. This theory could be applied to everything. In his previous life, there were people who practiced evil arts, but the most powerful was to combine the 2 or the 3 into one. However, the essence would not change. After a living being died, if it wasn't in a place with dense yin qi, the corpse would rot and return to the earth. If it wasn't, the corpse would become a zombie. However, no matter how dense the yin qi was, once a living being died, the soul would be taken away. If there was a netherworld, then there would be reapers. If there wasn't a netherworld, then there would be the heavenly Tao. Therefore, even if a corpse became a zombie, it would have no soul and no memory of the previous life. Without a soul, it would be a walking corpse, no different from an ordinary beast. Now, the undying beings in the northern frontier were like this. This was common sense. Of course, it didn't mean that the undying beings couldn't develop spiritual intelligence. It was just that during the period when they just became undying beings, they had no memory, and their spiritual intelligence was like that of wild beasts. Coupled with their desire for flesh and blood and their hatred for living beings, it meant that they were destined to be with other undying beings with low spiritual intelligence. If they wanted to develop enough spiritual intelligence, unless there was a powerful undying being to guide them, they could only accumulate over time, become stronger little by little, and develop new spiritual intelligence. Want to have the memories and spiritual intelligence of the previous life as soon as a corpse was raised? It was not impossible. If a father as strong as the Yellow Emperor could also hide from the heavenly Tao and refine a living person into a drought demon, except for the appearance, everything else would be no different from when they were alive. This was because this type of undying beings was the combination of corpse, bone, and soul. They were extremely powerful once they were born, but the conditions to create them were also extremely difficult. Even if they existed, they were basically nurtured by the heavens and earth. Those heaven and earth spiritual treasures that combined the 3 types of undying beings were extremely difficult to find. In a world like the Sky Martial Continent, it might not be possible to gather all of them. Furthermore, this world was extremely xenophobic and didn't trust existences that came from the other side of the gate of heaven. Once they appeared, they would be enemies. Hence, heaven and earth spiritual treasures that were produced in other worlds would rarely appear in the Sky Martial Continent. Su Yin was indeed not weak. He was a rogue cultivator who wasn't born as a guardian of the gate of heaven. No one knew where he got the opportunity to obtain the Void Realm cultivation method that almost 80% of the cultivators in the Sky Martial Continent dreamt of. He also found another way to become the god that the assassins worshipped. However, good luck and a strong foundation were 2 different things. Su Yin being able to create undying beings was already inconceivable to Lin Yuan. If it was said that Su Yin was able to create a large number of undying beings with spiritual intelligence, it would be a little inexplicable. Furthermore, no matter what, Lei Fan had died at the hands of Yang Qinglin's disciples. Since he had appeared in this situation, he must be one of the undying beings under Su Yin. But if that was the case, Lei Fan's strength would not be able to match up to the three types of undying beings. What kind of existence was the Eldritch World? Golden immortals were everywhere, and Daluo was as common as dogs. Even if it had gone through a few catastrophes, the power system of the Eldritch World was absolutely tyrannical. And in the era when Hambo was born, although it was not as strong as the early Eldritch World, it was definitely comparable to the existence of a golden immortal. It couldn't be that the Void Realm was equivalent to the strength of a golden immortal, right? That would be the biggest joke in the world. Furthermore, how did the undying beings and the purgatory demonic beasts mix together? Although these two things had many similar characteristics, Lin Yuan had seen the purgatory demonic beasts before. They were not much different from the ordinary demonic beasts, except that they were more violent, ruthless, and had lower spiritual intelligence. But if they could control the hostility in their hearts, they would be no different from the ordinary demonic beasts. They could even develop and grow stronger under the eyes of the Beast Lord Kirin, and become a force that could easily move in the Hengduan Mountains. But no matter how well the undying beings hid, they would still be surrounded by the Death Qi or Yin Qi. As long as one was not blind, one could tell whether they were humans or ghosts. After that, did you see any of those undying beings with spiritual intelligence? Lin Yuan's heart moved, and he turned his head to ask. Chapter 9:11. This is not the case. Li Zhong clasped his fists and shook his head after thinking carefully for a while. He said in a deep voice, "The current northern frontier's immortals began to appear after the captives were rescued. Originally, there were only starving ghost forests and other places. Later, more and more refugees died in the hands of the immortals, and the death aura gradually spread. Some life-forbidden zones gradually appeared, and the number of immortals increased significantly. It seems that these immortals with spiritual wisdom were mostly dealt with," Lin Yuan muttered softly. "During the period of the Northern Restoration Society's dormancy, these immortals should have already appeared, but they had spiritual wisdom no different from ordinary people. In addition, similar things had never appeared before. Even if they were seen, they would at most be regarded as being surrounded by death aura. After all, it was easy to accumulate death aura in places such as cemeteries, and there were professions such as gravediggers. There were more high-ranking officials and dignitaries in the south, and there were more gravediggers. People with death aura from the tombs were not rare. After fighting with the immortals in the northern frontier, he realized the difference between these existences. Therefore, when Su Yin stirred up the chaos in Shunning City, he had no other purpose. He just wanted to take away these immortals whose identities were exposed. Because their identities were exposed, they could not continue to lurk in the northern frontier with a well-developed intelligence network. He had to deal with them himself, and then he created these immortals in the northern frontier. So, was it a potion? Or something similar? Su Yan's strength was not weak, but the coverage of his priesthood was not much, especially those related to the underworld. If he did not rely on external objects, it was tantamount to a fool's dream to create immortals. "That's troublesome," Lin Yuan muttered again, and his eyes flickered slightly. Immortals did not exist in the Tianwu continent in the past. It was only now that the world was complete that it was possible to create conditions conducive to the birth of immortals. But as long as Lin Yuan did not agree, not just anyone could steal the Underworld King's authority. Unless it was an existence like Hamba, who was originally related to immortals, then it was possible to transform low-level immortals through various means. Or, the other party was an existence who had thoroughly studied immortals and could even use various spiritual objects to refine some pills and medicines that could transform living creatures into immortals. Behind Su Yin stood an existence with even more terrifying strength. He was merely the cannon fodder that charged forward after hearing the signal. But the mastermind behind this was not Hamba. It was just an incomplete small world. How could it accommodate so many great gods? Good. What the hell are you doing? At the start, Lin Yuan thought that the one who transformed the northern frontier into the underworld was Hamba. In the end, through Lei Fan, he found out about Su Yin, and through the intelligence of the northern frontier, as well as part of his own analysis, he realized that there might be another mastermind behind Su Yin. Who knew if there were other almighty beings behind this mastermind? After the immortals that appeared at the beginning were rescued, they never appeared again. Then, have you ever caught those immortals that appeared earlier? Lin Yuan turned his head to look at Li Zhong. Li Zhong was silent for a moment, then gently shook his head and said in a deep voice, "At the beginning, we did indeed try to catch the immortals, but after handing them over to the Ministry of Works, they still could not research anything and could not even find a way to kill them. It was only later that some folk remedies appeared, for example, using lychee wood to burn the immortals' corpses to ensure that they could not be revived again. So when we caught the immortals later on, we basically got rid of them directly and did not leave them in the area under our control to prevent any unforeseen circumstances." Folk remedies, this is interesting and very meticulous. Lin Yuan gently chewed on the words folk remedies, his eyes narrowing. Using lychee wood to burn the corpses could ensure that the corpses would not be revived. This method was used by the Maoshan Taoist priest to deal with zombies during the Republic of China in his previous life. This method could not be a folk remedy. Either there was a Taoist tradition from the previous life that had spread to this world, but this tradition had gradually declined to the point where it could only be hidden among the people, or this method of dealing with the immortals came from the person who created the immortals. He wanted the northern frontier to get rid of all the immortals that they caught, so as to block the possibility of Lin Yuan finding anything from those immortals, and the latter was more likely. After all, the three sects of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism were the supreme Taoist traditions from the previous life. Although there were also three sects of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism in this world, the difference between the Abhijna, Taoism, and Confucianism of the two sects was not small. If there was really a Taoist tradition from the previous life, even if it was the Maoshan Taoism in the Age of Chaos, it would not be inferior to those super sects in this world for more than 100 years. This was the difference in foundation. They should be destroying the corpses. Li Zhong, mobilize all the spies of the Association of the Demon Emperor and investigate this matter in detail. I want to know who these so-called folk remedies came from. In addition, when I came back, I saw many idle warriors and mercenaries hunting the immortals outside the city. Prepare a copy of the information of these people, especially those who did this at the beginning. Don't miss out on any of them. Lin Yuan's lips curled up slightly, and he sneered, "You want to destroy the corpses, but this is the truth. When you tell a lie, you have to make up for it with countless lies. When there are more and more such lies, the flaws will become bigger and bigger." I understand. Li Zhong bowed slightly. His brain was not slow. Although his knowledge and experience were not as good as Lin Yuan's, he could still guess most of it. For example, Lin Yuan asked if there were any captives of the immortals because he wanted to find something from the immortals. And those so-called folk remedies were not as simple as he thought at the beginning. The purpose of these folk remedies was to get rid of the captured immortals, so as to prevent Lin Yuan from getting what he wanted from them. Therefore, the people who invented these folk remedies did not have good intentions from the beginning, and the people who spared no effort to promote this matter were probably not clean. A matter that originally seemed to be very good, after adding complicated thoughts, instantly became dangerous and sinister. One of the 50 heavenly Tao had escaped. Only the human heart could only increase and not decrease. Li Xian, I'll leave this matter to you. Li Zhong turned his head, his eyes falling on a young man wearing a black official uniform of the northern frontier, and whispered. The young man looked 70% similar to Li Zhong, but his temperament was completely different. Li Zhong was similar to a romantic scholar, always carrying a faint scholarly aura. But this young man was like a block of ice, constantly emitting an indifferent aura that kept strangers away. Chapter 9:12. Li Xian bowed expressionlessly, turned around, and picked up a folder beside his feet. He said in a deep voice, "I've checked. The people who came up with the folk prescription are all villagers. The prescription was given to them by someone else, and they were even given a sum of money to spread it to the cities in the northern frontier. However, the people who came up with the folk prescription must have used illusionary techniques to disguise themselves. I've asked many people, and even the people in a village said that those people looked different when they saw them." At this point, he paused, then squinted his eyes and said, "Although the Sky Demon's attack left all parties short of manpower, the Association of the Demon Emperor set up some guard stations and outposts in the countryside when they transformed. The purpose was to monitor these people who were playing tricks in the dark. However, there was no useful information in those outposts. The Dragon King had previously passed down a secret technique called the illusionary spirit pupil. As long as the two parties' realms are not more than 3 realms apart, any illusionary techniques or disguise will be ineffective. It is a compulsory course for the trainees of the 3 intelligence divisions in the northern frontier." Then, Li Zhong was stunned and looked at Li Xian with some surprise. It seemed that he did not expect his younger brother to be able to investigate this step under his nose. "As far as I know, no matter if it is the northern frontier or the surrounding areas, there is only one secret technique that can fool the illusionary spirit pupil. That is the 9-tailed phantom from the Hungduan Mountains. It is a secret technique of the Fox clan's bloodline. Moreover, those who have mastered this technique are basically people with strong bloodlines. Even if they are not the clan leaders, they are at least sanuses or sanuses." Li Xian still had a straight face and continued, "However, it is meaningless to suspect the Fox clan because of this. Even if it is a human, if he obtains the corpse of this kind of Fox clan member, he can perform the 9-tailed phantom 1 to 3 times. It can only be said that this is a theory. In addition, there is no way to enter the Hungduan Mountains to investigate this matter, so my investigation ends here." "Huh." Lin Yuan sneered and turned to look at Li Xian. He said indifferently, "You told me so confidently that this clue is broken, but you did not mention the other clue. This means that you have already found useful information. Speak. What do you want?" Li Xian's expression changed slightly. Just as he opened his mouth, he was interrupted by a low roar. "How dare you?" Li Zhong stood up straight and quickly walked in front of Li Xian. He raised his right hand and slapped Li Xian in the face. After all, the difference in cultivation between the brothers was obvious. Li Xian didn't even have time to react before he was slapped to the ground by Li Zhong. The files in his hands were scattered all over the ground. Taking a deep breath and calming himself down, Li Zhong said with a cold face, "Li Xian, let me remind you that all the information you have now is based on the power of the 3 intelligence divisions of the northern frontier. Even if you personally investigated some of the information, it's not difficult to reverse engineer the information. Therefore, you can't hide from us what we want to know. Since you said this yourself, the Dragon King will remember your contribution. But if you want to ask for something, if you want to die, just say it." Li Xian didn't say anything. He just sat in the middle of the scattered files and stared unblinkingly at Lin Yuan. Li Zhong's expression changed slightly. He raised his hand again and was about to continue slapping. "Li Zhong." Lin Yuan's voice was very calm, but Li Zhong trembled slightly. His raised right hand also froze in midair. Li Zhong was now under Lin Yuan's command. He was definitely a veteran, so he understood Lin Yuan's personality more thoroughly. To Lin Yuan, character, reputation, and family background didn't matter. He only cared about ability. There was only one rule in the northern frontier officialdom. The capable went up, the mediocre stepped aside, and the mediocre went down. Trash didn't have any value in existing. Li Xian was able to discover the problem with folk remedies before him and investigate the matter in depth. Moreover, he already had results. This was already proof of his ability. As long as Li Xian honestly told him what he knew, he would naturally receive the rewards he deserved. After a period of experience, climbing to a high position would be a simple matter. But now, Li Xian's words were stuck here. It was obvious that he wanted to use this to get something from Lin Yuan. But this undoubtedly touched Lin Yuan's bottom line. With Lin Yuan's way of ruling, he could bestow all authority and honor to Li Zhong. Even if the people of the northern frontier worshipped Li Zhong and still cursed Lin Yuan as a demon, he didn't care. However, he also casually crushed the two previous kings of the northern frontier. This was because everything Li Zhong had wasn't obtained through fighting. It was given to him personally by Lin Yuan. If Li Zhong wanted to fight for things that didn't belong to him, his end wouldn't be much better. The best outcome would be being imprisoned for life. After all, it was his younger brother who had touched the Dragon King's bottom line. Li Zhong's reaction was extremely fast. His goal was to force his younger brother to admit defeat before Lin Yuan, and use this to save Li Xian's life. It was just that he didn't expect his younger brother to be so stubborn, and the Dragon King had already spoken. He was afraid no one would be able to save his younger brother. This should be the first time we've met. I don't know how Li Zhong usually describes me to you, but you are a capable and thoughtful person. So from the things I've done in the past, you should be able to infer what my way of ruling is like. But since you've spoken, I don't mind your offense. Whatever you want, I can satisfy you. Even if you want to sit in Li Zhong's position, it's just a matter of a word to me. At this point, Lin Yuan paused and looked meaningfully at Li Xian. He joked, but you have to think carefully. If you can't complete the task you want, death to you will become a relief. After he finished speaking, Li Xian slowly stood up from the ground. He reached out and patted the dust off his body. He said calmly, I can't interfere with the MI7, but you have to choose between the embroidered uniform guards and the association of the Demon Emperor for me. I've traveled to the various empires over the years, and I can be sure that none of the empire's intelligence agencies are as perfect as the northern frontiers. It's only a matter of time before the northern frontier's eyes and ears spread all over the continent. But this bunch of good-for-nothings from the northern frontier only know how to scheme against each other and even drag their own people down. It's irritating to see them. Agreed. Then, continue with the information you've gathered. I hope your information is worth the position you want. Otherwise, Lin Yuan nodded slightly and retracted his gaze. Although Li Zhong's expression was calm, if one looked closely, it wasn't hard to see that Li Zhong was trembling at this moment, as if he was extremely angry. Chapter 9:13. Actually, it's nothing. Whether it's the Northern Restoration Society or the chaos in Shunning City, it all boils down to the word ghost. Previously, the Sky Demon used the elixir of immortality to harm the northern frontier. Although we've managed to clean up a lot of them during this period of time, there are always a few that slip through the net. Although the protective umbrella that the Sky Demon built in the northern frontier was damaged, it was still barely usable. After that, everything that happened in the northern frontier was actually based on this damaged protective umbrella. Someone took advantage of the absence of the Dragon King to take over this protective umbrella and contacted the Sky Demon. Then he secretly transferred a batch of the elixir of immortality. Thus, he hid those that slipped through the net and continued to develop and strengthen. He even began to recruit some non-staff members, which was the embryonic form of the Northern Restoration Society. Looking at the northern frontier, there weren't many people who had the ability to do this, especially after Sherdong, Sunan, and the others were captured one after another. Only Luo Su and Li Zhong might be able to do this. After all, going east, that guy's surname Zhang wasn't someone to be trifled with, and he was wholeheartedly loyal to the northern frontier. In other words, he hated the Xuanjian dynasty. Only on the northern frontier could he have a stage to develop his talent. If he wanted to send the elixir of immortality to the northern frontier without his knowledge, most people might not be able to do it even if they risked their lives. Thus, following this train of thought, I secretly investigated Li Zhong and Luo Su. On the surface, these two seemed to be more honest, but no matter how well Luo Su disguised himself, he still exposed a flaw. Li Xian stretched out his hand and rubbed his swollen cheek that Li Zhong had slapped. He said indifferently, the Blackwater Army, the Falling Star Army, and part of the Southern Expedition set up camps at the source of the Wei River as the first line of defense against the Sky Demon. To be honest, this was a bad idea, but it couldn't be helped. After all, we had to test the actual combat power of the Sky Demon Corps before we could allocate troops and equipment to the various lines of defense. But he should never have agreed to the plan of counterattacking the Sky Demon. What he shouldn't have done even more was that he did a lot of tricks, which allowed me to lock onto him instead of continuing to suspect him and Li Zhong of who the traitor was. It saved me a lot of time. No. Li Zhong shook his head and interrupted Li Xian. He said with certainty, he did it on purpose, because at that time, everything he had set up in the northern frontier was almost complete. Whether he exposed himself or not was meaningless. At that time, it could even be said that he exposed himself. His purpose was to make us focus our attention on him. The Immortals also appeared not long after that. The connection with the Hunduan Mountains was also broken at that time. He reached out his hand to cover half of our eyes, making us ignore some things that we should have seen. Interesting, Lin Yuan didn't open his mouth to interrupt the Li brothers, but his gaze became meaningful. Luo Su's loyalty to him originated from the existence of Mara, who could suppress the purgatory fire in him. This was never true loyalty, but it was the most trustworthy loyalty. But ever since he met Lei Fan, Lin Yuan was no longer surprised by Luo Su's betrayal in his heart. Luo Su was picked up by Lei Fan near the destroyed Zhongshan city. Even if the two of them had some relationship that outsiders didn't know, it was normal for people's hearts to change easily. Especially after experiencing a natural disaster, people's hearts would become more and more fickle. A refugee with an unknown identity suddenly became Lei Fan's aide. Lin Yuan would never believe that there wasn't any deal or checks and balances involved. No matter what Luo Su did, Lei Fan would definitely have prepared a set of methods to restrain Luo Su should he betray him. If it was in his previous life, it would have been something like planting a bomb in Luo Su's body. In the Heaven's martial world, some obscure secret arts or highly toxic pills could easily achieve this. Hence, it was hard to say whether Luo Su was loyal to Lei Fan or not, but if Lei Fan needed him, Luo Su would definitely become his most obedient subordinate. With Lei Fan dead, Luo Su would be a good knife in Lin Yuan's hands. He could control Sherdong and deter the various factions. But if Lei Fan wasn't dead, no matter how capable Luo Su was, Lin Yuan wouldn't entrust him with any important tasks. But Lin Yuan would never have thought that Su Yin, or rather, the person behind Su Yin, would have such great capabilities to snatch the confirmed dead Lei Fan out from the gates of hell and even turn him into an immortal. He even used him to instigate Luo Su and planted a bomb called the Restoration North Society by his side. But what Lin Yuan didn't expect was that Luo Su's ability was actually so strong. Except for Yi Busho, who wasn't part of the establishment and only took orders from Lin Yuan, the Association of the Demon Emperor, the Embroidered Uniform Guards, and the MI7 were now known as the three intelligence divisions. Except for the Association of the Demon Emperor, which had a mix of members, Lin Yuan actually had absolute control over more than 80% of the people in the Embroidered Uniform Guards and the MI7. But Luo Su was able to play the various intelligence agencies in the palm of his hand in such an environment. He even used a method of splitting up and giving out orders one by one, causing the agencies that were originally loyal to Lin Yuan to do things that were completely unfavorable to Lin Yuan. And before Luo Su exposed himself, he even kept it a secret from the various intelligence agencies. Even Lin Yuan didn't have any suspicions about him. After Luo Su exposed his identity as a mole, he used assassination and anti-tracking methods to get rid of a group of spies. Since then, we have completely lost all news of Luo Su. But in this way, without Luo Su as a shield, we have quickly found the remaining people under that shield and uprooted them. Even some people who were unsure whether they were involved, but who were indeed part of Luo Su's faction, have been arrested and sent to the Embroidered Uniform Guards prison to be strictly screened if they were involved. On the downside, the entire Northern Frontier's intelligence agencies, and even my stupid brother, have all been slapped in the face by Luo Su. It can even be said that we have been played in the palm of his hand. If this matter were to spread, for a long time in the future, the Northern Frontier's intelligence agencies, which should have been unrivaled in the world, would become the laughing stock of others. But on the upside, our gains are equally huge. This time, we have suffered a loss and are prepared. Next time, we won't fall for the same trick. Not only did we manage to stop our losses in time, but we also thoroughly investigated the northern frontier and cleaned up a large number of spies and redundant officials. The entire northern frontier has been cleaned up. In the long run, this is excellent. At this time, Li Xian stood up slightly and said with a cold smile, "So now, as long as we find Luo Su, we will be able to know who is behind all this. I already have an idea about this matter. I just need authority, enough authority, because to do this, we may have to kill a large number of people." Chapter 9:14. You mean, other than the mole we found, there are other people in the northern frontier who are in contact with Luo Su? Lin Yuan looked at Li Exin and pondered for a moment before he slowly said, "I know what you want to do, but you have to think clearly. Once you do this, there will be no turning back. You will either become the next Luo Su or die in the revenge of some people. In public, I support you, but in private, if I agree, your brother will resent me. This is my own choice. What is there for him to resent?" Li Xian took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slightly, and said resolutely, "A person's life should have some value. I have traveled and studied for so many years, but during this time in the northern frontier, I saw the word fairness. So I plan to stay in the northern frontier and show what I have learned." Speaking of retreating, Dragon King, you must be joking. From the moment I stood here and asked for your authority, I have no way out. If I want to retreat, my stupid brother will take the blame for me, won't he? As his voice fell, Lin Yuan and Li Zhong both lowered their heads, as if thinking about something. In fact, the two of them had the same thought at this moment. Fairness? What was fairness? In fact, these two words do not exist at all, and even Lin Yuan has to admit this point. For example, two people might not have much difference in aptitude, but the difference in family background would lead to two completely different lives. But could you blame this on others? Other people's fathers and ancestors had accumulated a great fortune for their descendants. Why did you have to not let them use it? Because you did not have such a family background? That kind of fairness was the real injustice. Therefore, although the northern frontier did not care about family background, it was only relative. Those who could climb to a high position in the northern frontier were actually from aristocratic families. Because the resources in their hands were different, the cultivation methods they practiced were different, and the private tutors they hired were also different. Even the foundation laid at a young age was like the difference between heaven and earth. Even if their aptitudes were the same, with the help of these external factors, the difference in their cultivation progress was like heaven and earth. The fairness that the Northern Territory pursued was nothing more than eliminating the real foppish from a group of foppish people and leaving behind the talents that could be cultivated. Then a portion of these barely salvageable talents would be trained together with the grassroots who were good enough to make up for the gap between them and some external factors. After graduation, they would be placed in different positions according to their different abilities and conduct. This was indeed not something to be praised. Because at the end of the day, Lin Yuan did not seem to have changed anything. The aristocratic families were still at the top. It was just that the capable descendants of the aristocratic families had replaced the foppish sons whose bloodline was close to the main bloodline. Now that they were praised by Li Xian like this, both Lin Yuan and Li Zhong felt a little embarrassed. Of course, when he said this, Li Xian's gaze was also a little erratic. It was obvious that he did not mean what he said. No matter what, the Northern Frontier's concept of the capable go up, the mediocre step aside, and the mediocre step down was true. In the Northern Frontier, no matter whether it was honest or cunning, as long as one could do good things and had enough ability to deal with any unexpected situation, one would be able to climb to a high position in time. It was much better than the other dynasties that relied on family background, connections, and experience. For people like the Li brothers who had enough ability and confidence in themselves, the Northern Frontier was undoubtedly a fatal attraction. It was just that these words were not easy to say. After all, if these words were spoken, the world would say that those who held high positions in the northern frontier were outstanding. But on second thought, wouldn't that mean that the rest of the people in the northern frontier were all mediocre and mediocre? It may not sound nice to say this, but I hope that you can replace Luo Su and become the craziest dog and the fastest knife in the northern frontier. Before anyone wants to do anything to the northern frontier, you have to react immediately. As for the specific measures, you can decide for yourself. My personal opinion is that the embroidered uniform guard will either not appear, or if they do, they will go for the extermination of the whole family. Lin Yuan curled up his body and avoided the topic of Li Xin lying through his teeth. He said in a deep voice, "Of course, if you don't want to, you can forget about the embroidered uniform guard. But you can still be the temporary president of the Association of the Demon Emperor. It's just that you will have much less authority." This is the problem that Sherdong and Luo Su left for the successor. Who asked Sherdong to lose, right? 30 minutes later, teams of embroidered uniform guards in black armor and white robes led their men out of the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. They were silent all the way, but they walked with majestic strides. When they walked, they even put their right hand on the hilt of the saber at their waist, looking murderous. Shunning City used to be the most prosperous city in the northern frontier of the Shenwu dynasty. It was also the last line of defense of the Shenwu dynasty against the Hengduan Mountains. After it was occupied by Lin Yuan, it had been used as the capital of the northern frontier. Now that he had occupied the entire northern territory of the Shenwu dynasty, Shunning City did not need to continue to be the first line of defense. Naturally, it became more and more prosperous. To put it bluntly, after Lin Yuan had occupied the northern territory, Shunning City had become a delicious cake in the eyes of the big families in the northern frontier. In these years, except for the first batch of people who migrated to the northern frontier, those who could buy a house in Shunning City were the top aristocratic families in the northern cities. Although the aristocratic families referred to those who had been purged, if it were 5 years ago, these aristocratic families might not even be qualified to run errands for the real aristocratic families. They could be regarded as those who had benefited from Lin Yuan's independence. After these aristocratic families moved to Shunning City, they still followed their old habits to bribe the government offices. However, due to the special system of the northern frontier, they had little effect. Some of them even used too much force and attracted the attention of the embroidered uniform guards. Because of this, many families were broken into and destroyed. After the big wave of elimination, the remaining aristocratic families could be said to be as timid as mice, but they could also be said to be calm and steady. However, they all had one thing in common. They were well informed. The suspected existence of the Dragon King had returned to the northern frontier. Even the king of the northern frontier had been called back from the front line. This kind of news had caused a stir before Li Zhong met Lin Yuan. There were some small waves in the city, but generally speaking, everyone was still waiting for the news. But now, things were not out of their expectations. The Dragon King might have found out who had crossed the line again. Anyway, according to past experience, every time the king of the northern frontier made a big move, a lot of people would die. Sometimes it was the king of the northern frontier who died, but more often, it was the aristocratic families in the northern frontier who died. Chapter 9:15. East of Shunning City, in the mansion of the Zhao family. Shao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard shook the gray cloak behind him and sat on a chair that one of his subordinates had found. Then he used a piece of yellow silk cloth to wipe the blood on the blade while coldly sizing up Lord Zhao, who was kneeling 3 meters in front of him. He said with a smile, "Before we get to the point, I have to clean my blade." The blade of the embroidered uniform guard is handy, sharp, fast, and not light or heavy. However, it doesn't have a blood groove. If I don't clean the blood on the blade before putting it back in its sheath, it will be so rusty that it won't be able to be pulled out tomorrow morning. Old Master Zhao's eyes were lifeless, and his body was still trembling slightly. For a moment, he did not know what to do. In fact, he could not even tell if this embroidered uniform guard was threatening him or if he was just grumbling after killing someone. He would get to the main topic later. Lord, I don't know what mistake my Zhao clan has committed. Why did it bring about such a calamity? Lord Zhao didn't say anything, but the second young master of the Zhao family, who was also kneeling at the side, couldn't help but open his mouth. His eyes were full of resentment. Since the Zhao family was under the northern frontier, they had been living a stable life. They sent their servants to farm when they needed to. Occasionally, they would follow the northern frontier caravans on the trade route of the Hengduan mountain range to earn some quick money to maintain the family business. Their lives were not as carefree as before, but their income had increased by more than 10 times. There were more than 300 people in the Zhao family, and all of them were satisfied. The Zhao family had 7 sons in this generation, and 2 of them had even entered the Northern Frontier Academy. If there were no accidents, they would be people who would bring honor to their ancestors in the future. But now it was impossible. The Zhao family was going to be gone. Puchi. A cold light flashed. Shao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard frowned and threw away the blood-stained silk cloth. He waved his hand, and his subordinate passed him another piece. He then focused on wiping the long blade in his hand again, as if the one he had just killed was just a pig and not a living second young master of the Zhao family. The Zhao family had been destroyed overnight. The servants had all been killed. The second son had just died. Master Zhao raised his head and opened his mouth. However, no one knew if it was because he was frightened or if it was because he was mentally and physically exhausted that he didn't make a single sound. Shao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard raised his head and grinned at old Master Zhao. Not long ago, the embroidered uniform guard changed their commander. Today we came out to greet you. After all, we still have a long way to go in the future. Also, without my permission, if anyone dares to say a word, I'll have his head. His voice was like a clap of thunder, making the faces of the Zhao family members turn pale. There were not many people on the northern frontier who did not know Luo Su. That ruthless and cruel commander of the embroidered uniform guards had done similar things when he was at his most arrogant. However, that was only when there was conclusive evidence that certain aristocratic families were guilty that he dared to act so arrogantly. But this new commander who replaced Luo Su, it was just a greeting, yet he killed so many people? And from the looks of it, the Zhao family wasn't the only unlucky one. The members of the Zhao family all secretly sucked in a breath of cold air. For a moment, they couldn't describe how vicious, cruel, and cunning the new commander was. Shao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard then stood up and patted old Master Zhao's face. The sinister smile on his face gradually faded and was replaced by a serious expression. He even clasped his fists and said, "Pass on Commander Li's order." You merchants did not listen to advice, did not respect the law, and did not register with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Instead, you followed the caravans of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce and made a few trips to the Hengduan mountain range to take large amounts of wealth into your hands. It's not that the embroidered uniform guard didn't know about these things. It's just that they were too lazy to make a fuss about it. But now, the embroidered uniform guard wants to make a fuss about it. At this point, he reached out his hand and pinched old Master Zhao's chin. He said coldly, "I'll give you one last chance. Tell me everything you've seen and heard on this trip. Family, extermination, clan." "Sir, we really don't know about this." The fourth young master of the Zhao family narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "I'm a student of the Northern Frontier Academy. We've studied before and wanted to know what tricks our opponents played to be able to accurately distinguish the caravans from the spies. At the same time, we wanted to know what method they used to make those who had experienced the Hengduan mountain range become amnesiacs. We've always wanted to know what happened in the Hengduan mountain range. Now that you're asking us, we can't answer." When he said this, the fourth young master of the Zhao family obviously thought about it. Because he didn't hear Shao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard call him to speak, he revealed his identity as a student of the Northern Frontier Academy when he opened his mouth. He hoped that the other party would be afraid of this identity and not dare to make a move. However, swish, the cold blade flashed. When Xiao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard started to wipe the blade again, the fourth young master of the Zhao family's headless body slowly lay in the corner. Obviously, the identity of a student of the Northern Frontier Academy was not very useful to the embroidered uniform guard. The embroidered uniform guard had the privilege of killing first and reporting later. If the embroidered uniform guard was provoked, unless the person's strength was extraordinary, the embroidered uniform guard would not hesitate to kill a student of the academy, even if the person was a teacher of the academy or a genius disciple on a certain list. If the embroidered uniform guard had such courage, what was the use of the privilege of killing first and reporting later? I've said it before. Before I allow you to speak, I'll cut off the head of whoever speaks. Xiao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard's eyes grew fiercer. He said fiercely, "Master Zhao, our commander said that if you really don't want to tell us what happened, it doesn't matter. As long as you can borrow the heads of your entire family to intimidate those who know how to talk and cooperate with us, then I'll definitely return the heads to you." Master Zhao was speechless. "What the hell do you mean by returning the heads to us? If you cut off the heads and sew them back when you're done with them, will we be able to live, or what?" Xiao Qi of the embroidered uniform guard finished wiping the blade this time and did not hurry to put it away. Instead, he said slowly, "Master Zhao, what do you think?" Things similar to the Zhao family's mansion were happening everywhere in Shunning City at the moment. Not long after Lin Yuan's return, Shunning City, which had been peaceful for a long time, was once again filled with the pungent smell of blood. Headless corpses were dragged out and burned one after another. Heads were hung on flagpoles and carried around by people. From this moment on, everyone realized that the new commander of the Brocade Guards was no less ferocious than Luo Su. In fact, he was even more terrifying in some details. It was as if he had never thought of leaving a way out for others. Chapter 916. The aristocratic families in the northern frontier were like leeks. They were different from their counterparts in other places. Even if their family members really held high positions in the northern frontier or paid abundant taxes, they could not affect the situation in the northern frontier. There was an invisible line there. If you did not want to cross it and did something in private, everyone could pretend that they did not see it. But if anyone dared to cross that line, what followed would undoubtedly be a tragic extermination of the whole family. Li Xian ordered the embroidered uniform guards to kill in Shunning City, which naturally aroused the dissatisfaction of many people, especially those whose family members were studying in the Northern Frontier Academy or had graduated from the academy and worked in a government office. They even gathered outside the Northern Frontier Prince's mansion, clamoring for an explanation from Li Zhong. Otherwise, they would not let it go. As for the so-called explanation, it was just that they hoped that Li Zhong would replace the commander of the embroidered uniform guards. Even if there was another existence like Luo Su, they would not necessarily be afraid. After all, although Luo Su's methods were a bit fierce, he still wanted to confirm that you were guilty, or that you were most likely related to the matter he wanted to investigate. Only then would he arrest and kill, and it would be fine if there was blood. But this new commander was different. He directly overturned a boat of people. Whether you knew it or not, as long as you were in his circle, then the embroidered uniform guards would definitely come to your door. Even if you did not see them for a while, don't think that you were safe. That was only because the embroidered uniform guards were busy dealing with the other aristocratic families and had not killed here. Li Zhong did not show up for these aristocratic families' actions, and Li Xian did not stand out to say a few words. But when the leading families were shouting happily, a group of embroidered uniform guards rushed over and pinned a pile of crimes on their heads. Without waiting for them to open their mouths to explain, they directly took out their sabers and slashed and killed. Therefore, in front of the prince's mansion in the northern frontier, the only place that was not tainted by the smell of blood, there were corpses with eyes open and pools of blood that gradually gathered into a small river. Although the embroidered uniform guards had the right to kill first and report later, they would not kill people for no reason. 8 or 9 out of 10 of those crimes were true. The only thing that was outrageous was that even the past of those aristocratic families had been dug out. Those were things that they had spent a large sum of money to bribe. Who would have thought that after a few years or more, those crimes that had been covered up would actually become the talismans that would hasten their deaths? Although everyone could tell that the embroidered uniform guards were deliberately looking for trouble, every time the embroidered uniform guards killed someone, they would loudly recite the evil deeds that person had done. It was also a form of demonstration. The commander who had mysteriously replaced Luo Su and took over the Brocade Guard was using this opportunity to send a message to the northern frontier. He was not Luo Su, who was uninterested in the past. If he wanted to, even if he did not like you, he could list 7 or 8 crimes against you. He could even go from killing a person to wiping out an entire family. To be honest, the northern frontier was originally a place of bitter cold. It was very normal for the people to be valiant. Just like the New Jinren who had killed her way out of the White Mountains and Black Waters in the previous life. 20,000 people had defeated the great Liao army of 700,000. She had left behind a legend in the future. The New Jinren was not a match for 10,000 people. It was not because the New Jinren was strong, but because of her living environment. At that time, the Great Song had fallen because the Central Plains had been too comfortable. The Great Liao had also fallen because they had too much contact with the Great Song. They had indulged in pleasure and lost their courage. In fact, these two dynasties that had been destroyed by women, any one of them could create a similar legend with the New Jinren. Although the northern frontier was not as difficult as the White Mountains and Black Waters, the ferocity of the monsters in the Hungduan Mountains was not comparable to the beasts that the New Jinren had faced in the past. Therefore, in the northern frontier, even a mortal was much stronger and more ferocious than an ordinary mortal. In such a big environment, which person in the northern frontier dared to say that their buttocks were clean, even if they thought that they had dealt with the aftermath properly and would not be found out? How many of those corpses lying in pools of blood had the same thought? In short, on the first day of his appointment, Li Xian had already set up his image. With Lin Yuan, Li Zhong, and a series of military forces in the northern frontier, even the aristocratic families and sects of the northern frontier in the past had to temporarily avoid the sharp edge, let alone the few big and small cats that had survived 2 or 3 purges. In the prince's mansion in the northern frontier, Lin Yuan glanced at the flags with heads hanging on them passing by the gate of the prince's mansion, and said with a smile, "Your brother, and you are so different that I doubt whether you are twins. But this move is a bit cruel, but it is effective. In the future, if Commander Li wants to know something, he can just spread the word, and there will be plenty of people rushing to tell him. After all, if he doesn't say anything, the entire northern frontier will not be peaceful. Wave after wave of slaughter, no one can stand it." Speaking of this, Lin Yuan smiled and added in a low voice, "If he can't stand it, he will have to rise up. Not to mention the other armies. The Southern Battlefront Army alone is not something that any grasshead king can compete with. No matter what he chooses, he will die. If he doesn't want to die, he can only cooperate honestly. In the past, he could still play some tricks, but in the future, he will have to lower his head and live a life. So, even if there is a big secret, they can only tell us." Li Zhong also nodded thoughtfully and said in a low voice, "And just in case, if they reveal something we don't want to know, or something we already know, not only will they not get any benefits, but they will also make us unhappy. After killing another batch, if they want to talk, they will tell us everything they know." Because today, when he dug up the old accounts, he also warned them that as long as the Brocade Guard is willing, there is nothing they can't find out. If they lie, it will bring disaster to themselves and their families. Lin Yuan looked at Li Zhong with a strange expression. The Li brothers were really bad. Li Xian did have some tricks up his sleeves. Of the old accounts he dug up today, almost 40% were not the original files of the northern frontier, but the ones Li Xian found out bit by bit during this period of time. Obviously, although this person looked a little frivolous, in reality, he was a person who planned before acting. For the position of commander of the Brocade Guard, he must have done a lot of homework. It was estimated that, except for where Luo Su was hiding, Li Xian had figured out everything else. Those spies that Luo Su had planted in the northern frontier were most likely being monitored at this moment, waiting for Li Xian to close the net. Chapter 9:17 As he chatted with Li Zhong on and off, he watched as the embroidered uniform guards either left or returned after receiving their orders. On the other end of the universal scripture, there was a sudden change. About that black Jiao coming back? Why didn't you tell me? This voice belonged to Luo Su. Compared to the state he was in when he was tortured by the flames of purgatory at the northern frontier, Luo Su was obviously much more energetic now, as if he had already gotten rid of the flames of purgatory that had been pestering him. It also seemed that after completing the series of arrangements at the northern frontier, some sort of restraint between Luo Su and Lei Fan had disappeared. At this moment, when Luo Su spoke to Lei Fan, his tone was obviously interrogative. Lei Fan's slightly languid voice then rang out. Even if I told you, what could you do? Huh? Luo Su, you have been at the northern frontier for such a long time. Surely you wouldn't be so naive to think that those who could make a name for themselves in the northern frontier are all easy to deal with, right? There was a moment of silence between the two of them before Lei Fan said slowly, I know that you are feeling sorry for the trap that you had painstakingly set up, but before you could fully unleash it, it was almost wiped out by that new embroidered uniform guard commander. But the problem is, when you first escaped, did you not think that this day would come sooner or later? Or perhaps you already knew about it in advance. If you were not prepared, then you were not prepared. They would not be able to hide it. So, what if you were good at planning? That black Jiao, on this path, could crush you and me as easily as crushing chickens and pottery dogs. There is no point in talking too much about this. Why don't you think about what to do next? Anyway, from what I see, there is no place for you in the northern frontier. Those Li brothers are not to be trifled with. Let me think about it. Luo Su obviously knew this as well, and said weakly, I just don't understand. I worked so hard to set up this trap and set up so many smoke screens. How did that brat by the name of Li Xian manage to unravel the cocoon so quickly and set his sights on those spies of mine? After that, Luo Su got up to leave, and there was no further action from the other side. Lin Yuan was silent for a moment before he suddenly opened his mouth to say, Li Zhong, have you ever thought that your brother's ability is a little? Luo Su's question was indeed worth thinking about. When Lin Yuan was not in the northern frontier, it was not surprising that he secretly made some small moves. However, this move satisfied the entire Northern Frontier Intelligence Agency, and then came up with a smokescreen of folk remedies. Although it did not affect the overall situation, but if one thought about it carefully, it could delay the person who took over this matter for a period of time. By the time they unraveled the cocoon and found out about the umbrella, some of the other tricks that Luo Su had set up before would have begun to come into play, and Li Zhong would be in a terrible fix again. However, Li Xian, who had returned from studying in other places, showed extremely tough methods and outstanding foresight in this matter. Borrowing Li Zhong's power in the northern frontier, he mobilized the personnel of the 3 divisions that were prepared to be sent to various places to investigate this matter. Even before Lin Yuan was aware of this matter, he had already found out most of the truth and even made preparations in advance. However, he did not reveal any information to Li Zhong, as if he was waiting for Lin Yuan to come back and mention this matter. Moreover, how did Li Xian know the secrets hidden under the articles of the Northern Frontier Intelligence Agency? There were indeed spies in the various gathering places, but most of them were members of the Association of the Demon Emperor. If they were not summoned, they would be no different from ordinary cultivators in the Northern Frontier. Some of the hidden contact points and outposts could not be known without a certain level of authority. Even in the internal system of the embroidered uniform guard, if one wanted to know these things, one had to be a Qinhu. Li Xian could use Li Zhong's power to read these things, but to master them in such a short time and use all his power perfectly, even Sherdong and Luo Su might not be able to do so. Also, when he read these things, he had used Li Zhong's intelligence. Even if the people in charge of these things did not stop him, they should have reported to Li Zhong afterwards. But now, Li Zhong was still trembling in anger at Li Xian's previous actions. Clearly, he had not informed Li Xian in advance. Li Zhong frowned slightly and said, In this case, my brother does have some problems, but for now it is good. After this matter, I will watch this boy with Bureau Chief Yi. If he does anything to harm the northern frontier or wants to become the second Luo Su, I will personally send him on his way. Lin Yuan replied faintly. He was not very interested in the so-called politics. Whether the northern frontier was peaceful or whether there were many factions, this was something that no power could avoid. For him, the northern region used to be just a place to live. It was impossible for him to deal with everything in all aspects. What's more, when he returned to the world of his previous life in the future, he would have to be dormant for a period of time. No matter which world the cultivation and martial arts declined, Lin Yuan did not believe that a world that could even hide from Hongjun was really as simple as it seemed on the surface. It was cool to solve problems by force, but not by force was the best solution. With Lin Yuan's current strength, he could easily crush his enemies, but it was meaningless. He preferred to have a large group of outstanding talents by his side. He could use a relatively gentle method to destroy everything of that person. He could watch him become more and more haggard and depressed day by day until he was better off dead. Only then would he be able to live without letting down the devil in his heart that was pestering him. The northern frontier used to be a tool for revenge for Lin Yuan. Now, the northern frontier would gradually become a source of incense for Lin Yuan. Although it was dispensable for him who walked the path of the totem ancient god, it was still more important. No matter from which perspective, Lin Yuan hoped that the northern frontier could be peaceful for a long time. He hoped to destroy the other empires and unify the Tianwu continent. In the end, he could open the gate of heaven and conquer the untainted land in his previous life. That would be the best. However, there were some taboos that he had to mention in advance. Just like how he knew that Luo Su was not useful, but he still entrusted him with important tasks. Now that he was bitten by Luo Su, he had nothing to say. It was not that he did not know how to judge people, but he did not expect Lei Fan to be able to come back from the dead. Now that he had put Li Xin in an important position, he was also reminding Li Zhong of some undesirable possibilities. Otherwise, if he did not say the ugly words in advance, it would be difficult for anyone to step down from the stage if something happened. Let's leave it at that for now. Also, give me some immortals. The older the better. It would be best if they were the first batch to appear. I have a feeling that I can solve some of my doubts from them. Lin Yuan used the tip of his tail to pat Li Zhong on the back of his hand and said with a smile, "You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.